Hello once again. I am back after... Hello once again. I am back after a long hiatus. I am back. I will be making another video. I've set up the recording system differently. I used to be up against that back wall, and looking back, it didn't look very nice. I feel like this has more personality, and believe it or not, I do want to continue making these videos. Anyway, so we have a big task ahead of us. What I had planned, I should have done this like months ago. I wanted to do this months ago. I had everything planned out, like step by step. And this is going to be a pretty long video. I wanted to start like doing a review, an analysis of a work of art that I like. In this case, well, you can see the title. But what happened was things got in the way, and I sort of brushed it all under rug. But I'm here now, and I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna make it. I don't really think I should apologize, because there's nobody really to apologize to, but whatever. Stick around if you want to hear my opinion. If you don't, then that's fine as well. And, well, we'll see how it goes. Anyway, so yeah, what I was going to talk about was Breaking Bad. I know this is a bit overdue. I wanted to actually... I've had this whole video planned out pretty much since the show ended. For those of you who don't know, the show ended last year. It ended in like September, early September last year. So that gives you a glimpse of my organizational skills, I guess. Anyway, but I'm really serious about what I want to talk about, and I have quite a bit of content planned out. So strap yourselves in, I guess, if you're gonna stick with me for this next hour or so as I talk about that show. What I'm basically going to do is, I like talking about art, whether that be film, or video games, or books, painting, anything, etc. It's all interesting. All of it is interesting. Why is it all interesting? Well, that's a whole nother issue, but suffice it to say that it's all interesting. And Breaking Bad is one of the most interesting pieces out there. Now, if you've not watched the show, for all of you who've not watched the show, please go watch it. If anything, this video is an endorsement. It's saying, go watch the show if you haven't watched the show. But I imagine most people have already watched the show. Most people going to watch this have probably watched the show. Nonetheless, I will present it in such a way that like to an audience of people who have not seen anything and don't know, or maybe people forgot. I don't know. I'm assuming that you do not have any idea of what's going to come of what I'm going to talk about. It's like, my assumption is you are all blind or you forgot the entire show. That's what I'm going to. That's how I'm going to go about this. Now, the way this is going to work is, at first I'm going to talk about the show in general. I'm going to talk about, you know, the most apparent details, the plot, etc. Stuff that doesn't spoil anything, doesn't spoil anything serious. You don't get you don't get the focal climactic sections of the narrative ruined for you. Instead, I'm just going to give you, you know, the I want to say superficial stuff, but superficial isn't really the right word, because it's not like it's not superficial in the sense that it matters. It makes the work better. It's superficial in the sense that it's stuff I can talk about without spoiling, basically, like the visual structure of the show, or the pacing, etc. And then I'm going to talk about it with spoilers, where I'm going to go at, you know, I'm going to look at each episode. Well, not each episode, but I'm going to talk about the show and what I think about it in greater detail, relating specifically to the events that happen in all the seasons, and in all the episodes leading up to, and eventually the conclusion. So, right, so here we go. So this is the non-spoiler section. If you have not seen this show, you can watch this just fine. I'm not going to ruin anything in what I'm about to say. I'm just going to give you basic details. You should be fine. So Breaking Bad, or as it's known by its more apt moniker, Baking Bread, That was a funny little meme or whatever that was going around on the internet. It's a show about a, your everyday, down on his luck, middle-aged man who's a high school chemistry teacher, but he shouldn't be a high school chemistry teacher because he's incredibly talented. He's really good at chemistry, a lot better than, what would qualify someone to be a high school teacher. No, not that there's anything wrong with that job, it's just that, this guy's a genius, right? Why is he a high school chemistry teacher? Well, that sort of gets explained as we go along, but pretty much what happens is he's sick of his life as a high school chemistry teacher, so his brother-in-law, who works for the DEA, that's the Drug Enforcement Administration, pretty much shows him on a ride-along what the drug dealing world looks like, how much money specifically you could make by creating meth. And meth is a chemical, and this guy's a chemistry teacher, and he knows chemistry a lot, so he can create meth. He can create it very well, so he decides, you know what, I'm gonna make meth because, oh, he also finds out he has cancer. I forgot that detail, right. The guy finds out he has cancer and he realizes, oh look, okay, he doesn't want to die and leave his family with debt, so he wants to create meth and sell it so he can have enough money to save his family before they, when he dies, which should happen soon. That's the basic idea. And then the way he does that is he finds an old student of his who's now dealing meth, or who's making meth, and he hooks up with him, and they start making the meth together, and this former student of his is selling it, and pretty much they start having all these crazy adventures from there on in. And that's literally the only summary I can give you here in the non-spoiler section. What I can say about it, I mean, I could talk about a lot of stuff here, though, a lot of other stuff. This show basically focuses on just one character. Like, it doesn't, I mean, it shows other characters, but the focus is always with the one character, which is Walter White, that's the chemistry teacher. It's about him. He's the star, so to speak. Now that might seem, well, who cares about that little detail, but note that that's not always the case. I mean, a lot of shows, they sort of have, they have like a formula or a motive, or in a lot of, well, I mean, sometimes shows have ensemble casts where you can't look at any particular character and say, okay, he's the reason we're being told the story, he is the star. That almost never happens. Well, I mean, it's not that it never happens, but a lot of the time you get that. This is not like that. This is specifically, for a fact, this is a story about this one guy. And it's actually relevant for thematic reasons as well, but I'll get to that later on, like at the end of the video. I mean, we could talk about pacing. The show has, I mean, I'm going to be honest here, I would say that there are issues with its pacing, but for the most part, the pacing is very good. What usually happens is, there's 5 seasons, right? There's 5 seasons. The first season is very short, and the 5th season is like, it's like 2 half seasons put together. It's pretty long. The number of episodes, the fact that it differs is, see, the issues with pacing I'm talking about happened in Season 1 and Season 5 specifically, but the middle 3 seasons, 2, 3, and 4, those all follow a pacing formula. Basically, the beginning of the season has some very exciting event occurs, and then the majority of the season there on in is nothing really happens. I mean, there's a lot of character development, a lot of plot development, narrative threads appear here and there, and they grow bit by bit into something, and then it all climaxes at the end of the season, at the end of, say, Season 2 and 3 and 4, into something huge and epic, and that leads into the epic, entrance to the next season, and then it slows down again, and then speeds up. It's like this wave pattern you keep seeing from Seasons 2, 3, and 4. The reason Seasons 1 and 5 are different is, I imagine, for production reasons. Season 1, I mean, like, the story, I imagine the story changed a lot from what they had originally planned to what actually happened in Season 1. Season 1 had to be cut short for, I don't know why, maybe they couldn't think of anything. I'm sure you could find the details somewhere, but I don't actually know. In season 5, what happened there was a network wanted Breaking Bad on for another 2 seasons, but Vince Gilligan, the executive producer, he didn't want. He thought, okay, I can finish the story within 1 more season. But they wanted, they wanted more than 1 season. So what he did is he just made a longer season and split it in half. I honestly think that season 5 should have been even longer than it was. I think having a 6th season would have actually worked. But I'm not going to get into that now. I'm going to get into that in the spoiler section as to why, because it relates directly to things that happened in the show. As for general pacing, a lot of episodes, every single episode pretty much has its own pace, but you get a definite sense of when the pacing, of when it seems like fast and suspenseful, and a lot of stuff is happening, and you know that the stakes are high, and a lot of the times the pacing is very slow. Season 1 in particular has a few episodes where the pacing is so slow that it actually gets boring. As so does season 3. Actually, no, all the seasons except for the very last one, except for 5, they all have episodes that actually feel boring, that are so slow that you might get bored, because there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of slow scenes, a lot of shots where you just see a person's face or just what they're doing, and nothing's really happening, nothing's even being said, there's not even that much dialogue, but the scene itself is just elongated for some reason because they decided to make it like that. And this happens consistently, and it gets rather annoying, but at the same time it kind of works, because when you get to the epic parts at the end of the seasons, it builds up. And then when the epic parts start happening, you appreciate them more because they didn't happen beforehand. It's like it's all part of this like climactic curve upwards, and it's actually kind of neat. I'm not going to say that that's a flaw, but it's a genuine, it's just a thing you should be prepared for. What else should I say? This is again non-spoiler. You have, okay, I could talk about the visual structure of the show. What you have, the show takes place in Albuquerque, which is in New Mexico in the United States. It takes place in like this, it's a city, but it's surrounded by desert. Like there's desert everywhere. And the reason it's not, I'm not sure why it's that location, but I think one of the actors said that desert is like another character on the show. And it actually makes sense, because there's this whole Ozymandias thing going on in the show, which I'll bring up later as well. But it does make sense for it to take place in the desert, and you get a lot of visual shots of the desert. There's a lot of, there's a lot of deserty colors going along. Pretty much every episode, well, not every episode, but a lot of episodes, they'll start off with like this landscape of the desert, and maybe you see a character, maybe they do something. I mean, it varies from episode to episode, and then it goes into something. Then actual events start happening. Another thing is, the show likes to play around with linearity a lot. Like, a lot of the time, I mean, there's various times where the next episode will not begin exactly where the last one ended. It'll have an introduction section that's a flashback or a flash forward, or something that's completely irrelevant. Sometimes you just have like a shot of the desert and you see like a turtle or something, and or a character that we don't even know about that's just walking through the desert, and they find like an item or something. And the reason, and you might think, oh, that's weird. Wouldn't that take you out of the show? But it doesn't, because what actually happens is the shot at the beginning, it's always connected in some way to the story that's being told within that episode. The introduction is relevant. You don't see how it's relevant at the start, but you'll see how it's relevant in the end. And I'll bring this up again when I talk about individual episodes, because this happens consistently. Sometimes, you'll have random quaternary, tertiary characters talking about something that's completely inconsequential, and then you watch the episode, and at the end of the episode you find out, oh, well, that's why that scene existed there. They have neat little things like that, little like Easter eggy type things. So yeah, the show, despite, like, it sounds very, it doesn't sound very visual based on the premise. It just sounds like, oh, it's a guy who makes meth. But it's a very visual show. I say that adamantly. Like, the show tries hard to give you a sense of setting, to give you a sense of, oh, we are in the desert, this is what it's like. I mean, not that the desert is about drug dealing, but it gives you, it tries to emphasize the this visual component, and I like the fact that that's there because it means that the show cares about the visual elements. By the way, if it wasn't already clear, my opinion of this work in general is that it's very good, and that's why I'm talking about it, and that's why I'm also talking about it first, is because I think it's it's an important work of art to experience and to know if you're interested in art at all, because, or at least visual art, like film specifically, because it relates to all that stuff a lot. Anyway, what else I'm gonna say? I can also say, okay, the show doesn't always take itself seriously. There's some bottle episodes. There's episodes where very little actually happens. They're just kind of there for humor. There's episodes where there's entire scenes that are inconsequential, other than that they have a humorous element to them, or they contain an Easter egg, a little like narrative Easter egg, something that relates to something else or references something else in the show indirectly, and you have to actually like watch it and look for them. And there's many of these all around. I can think of a few examples off the top of my head that happened in season 5, but yeah, there's tons of little things like that scattered around, which is really good because it shows that the people who made the thing really cared. They cared enough to think of all of this as well. Like Vince Gilligan actually cared. That's why he put all this stuff in when he came up with the show. What else we have? Okay, I also want to talk about the mood, the tonality. It's generally pretty dark, I would say, because it gives you the world of drug dealing. That's what it focuses on. It focuses on Walter White, this character who's dealing drugs, and his partner Jesse Pinkman, who is his former student, and it also focuses on Walter's family and what he's going through there because of his cancer treatment and stuff. So you basically have the two worlds. You have like Walt's family world and you have the drug dealing world, and both have edges to them. I wouldn't say it's dark. I wouldn't say the show's trying to disgust you or be repulsive in any way, but there's things that are kind of unpleasant, just in a sense of mood. There's characters that are unpleasant to look at because they're drug addicts and they're just so depraved and stuff. Of course, I mean, a dedicated audience, you should get past that for the sake of plot and theme, but I'm just saying that that's there, so it's viewer discretion is advised. What else I will say? What else am I going to say? What I'm going to say is there are... Okay, right. When it comes to Easter eggs, I forgot to mention the episode names. The names of the episodes are also themselves Easter eggs or clever little references like that as well, which I guess makes sense. I mean, sometimes, the thing is, sometimes in shows that stuff is really apparent. In this show, it's really not. Some of these references are obscure. Sometimes they're not obscure, but then there's times that they're really obscure. You actually have to like think about something before it makes sense. For instance, the final episode of the show is called Felina, which is F-E-L-I-N-A. I don't even know what that means. I don't know why it's called Felina. I can't make heads or tails of that reference. The episode before the last one is called Granite State. Now that makes a lot more sense because the Granite State is New Hampshire, and in that episode, spoiler alert, technically the character is in, one of the characters is in New Hampshire. You know, whatever. That's just... You know, there's stuff like that. The episode names are also just an interesting thing. If you're watching the show, I would pay attention to them because there's little artistic grains therein as well. The last thing I guess I could talk about in this non-spoiler section is the just general ideas of the plot. The plot for this show is very calculated. It's very well thought out, like miles ahead from where it is. It's not fully thought out because, I mean, if you watch interviews with Vince Gilligan or heard of what he's said, there's things he didn't know about what would happen when he came up with the idea. When he and his friend came up with the idea for the show. For instance, the character Jesse Pinkman, Walt's friend, so Walt's student who he's working with, he was supposed to die very early on, but that didn't happen because the guy who played it, spoiler alert, by the way, that didn't happen. The character does not die very early on. He becomes a primary character. I think that's okay to spoil because it's not something... I mean, I guess that's a spoiler. I probably shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. I have issues with spoilers or not, but that is a minor, tiny spoiler. The main character, Jesse Pinkman, does not die immediately. Okay? He stays through season 1. He was supposed to die in the 2nd or 3rd episode. That was the idea that Vince Gilligan had. The idea changed because the guy who played him was a very good actor. So they decided to reconstruct the entire show around that. And if you actually watch the show later on, the idea of that becomes ridiculous because you can't imagine like Jesse Pinkman having been killed off that early. He becomes so important to the plot. This idea of plot structure becomes a lot more apparent later on in the show. Like season 1, they were testing their ground. They didn't really know what it was that they didn't really know what it was that they were doing. I mean, they knew what they were doing, but they didn't have everything figured out. I feel like after season 1, they figured out a lot of stuff. They figured out where they wanted the show to go, and the main like plot jumps and peaks that would happen. So it's at that point that everything starts to seem very calculated and very well thought out, and like scenes will happen and you won't understand why they're significant until later. They'll seem insignificant. They will seem just peripheral, like, oh, you know, they meet this random character who's you know, contributes to some event or another, and then that character becomes very, very important later on because, you know, because you find out that they're actually they're actually, you know, like a player in the meth business, and they have a role in what's gonna happen, and as a result they have a role in what Walt and Jesse have to deal with, because the two of them are in the business. They have to deal with people who are in the business. So, you know, and that happens a lot. Like, all these characters show up and you don't think that they're significant, but then they end up being significant because, you know, they're just showing these people's lives. And the you know, Walt and his family, they're showing their lives, and in their lives they interact with, you know, these characters. So of course these characters are going to become significant. You know, there's that. The show has a really good sense that it has this. It convinces you that everything that happens in it makes sense. Like, everything that happens seems to make a lot of sense. It's like, oh, of course that would happen. Of course that would happen. Not just for like a plot setting reason, but for a thematic reason. Like, okay, of course you would make that character do that to that character. It makes perfect sense that that would happen. But at the same time, you don't expect any of that from happening. It's unexpected, but when it happens, you're like, oh, of course this is what they would have happen. Of course, this is like the natural, you know, narrative progression given where we were at point A, now we're at point B. It makes perfect sense. Which I also think that's like a beautiful thing. You know, nothing seems contrived, nothing seems random, which is a very good like sign. That's how narrative should be. That's how a story should be. It should never seem contrived. It should never seem, oh, well, that's convenient. Oh, this character happened to be there. That's convenient. Nothing seems convenient. Everything makes sense because everything was thought out well in advance. And you can do nothing but commend the show for that. Right. What else? Theme. So, I think I could talk about the theme. Sorry, I'm just gonna check. Okay. I didn't talk about the theme later on, but there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the theme. In general, the show is about this one character, Walter White, and what he's going through. That's the whole idea. And there's all these ideas of change and you know, how sort of, you know, characters, individual characters, there's a real big sense of individuality and what an individual character is about, and how they go through their lives, and what an individual villain is about. Because, I mean, spoiler alert, but this isn't really a spoiler because this is a thematic idea that should be clear pretty much from the beginning, I think, to enjoy the show fully, to understand everything. It's the idea that Walter White, this high school chemistry teacher, he is becoming a villain as he goes through the meth business. He is becoming the bad guy. He is not, like, he's an anti-hero at best. He is not, morally perfect. No, he's morally questionable at best. But yeah, it's the idea of the villain. It's the idea of where the villain comes from. The show tells you that, because usually, even when villains are done in narrative, even if they're complex, they're not, you don't go into too many details about their lives or how they got there, you know, because all of that stuff just seems like an excuse. But this show really delves into that. It focuses on that. That's what the whole thing is about. It's about change and you know, human instincts and what a person can do, and you know, to protect themselves, to protect their family. You know, when the stakes are high, what are people driven to do? It's about greed. It's about not even greed though. It's not about greed. It's about self-fulfillment. That's what the show's about at the heart of it, I think. It's about self-fulfillment. It's about doing something that makes you happy, and what the cost of that is, and what a person will do to get that. In the end all. And some people will do more than others, but like everything that Walter White does, it's hard to feel bad for him. I mean, actually no, it's easy. It's not hard to feel bad for him. It's hard to hate him. It's the performance, it's the actor's performance, but it's the writing as well. It's very hard to hate this character, this main character. He is not someone you can just despise, because he's not just evil. He's not just good, but he's not evil. He's just human. It's simple like that. But he's not someone you can hate. And it's because he is doing something, what he's trying to do, he's doing something that fulfills him. He is doing something that he loves, that is passionate to him. Which sounds weird, I'm talking about making meth, but there's an entire other layer to this that I'll get to when I talk about the character. But why he's doing that, like self-fulfillment, it's an appealing idea, because we all want to do something that fulfills us, that makes us feel good inside, because we love to do that one particular thing. That's what Walter White does. That's what he's trying to do. That's what he's fighting for. That's why it's so easy to sympathize with him. So yeah, I think that's what the show's focus on. It's what that is, what the cost of that is. You know, you know, choices. It's about choice. There's a lot of like themes of what choices can do to a person, and how you have to live with them, and how it affects, you know, the people you love, your family, you know, ego. It's about ego. It's about if you have ego, what can you be driven to do? You know, what will you do to follow your soul, more or less, to do the thing that you really want to do. There's all these elements in play, and it's all about this one character. This one character arc gives you all of that, because, I mean, that's what you would get with that kind of character arc. And it's good that it's just about that one character. The show knows its scope very well. It does not try to do all these, like, okay, well, this isn't entirely true, because it kind of does this, but it kind of doesn't. But in general, the show focuses on this very compact, very elegant narrative idea. One guy, what is he going through? That's it. Everything that happens to everyone around him is ultimately part of his story as well, because it will tie in to what he ends up doing later, because it's all interconnected. But it's not about, like, oh, what does this character do and that character. Like a lot of shows, they'll just have like a streamlined cast, and you see, oh, what does character A do? Now we have to talk about character B, and this episode's going to talk about character C, and then it doesn't really go anywhere, because you just, you know, you have to give the audience something. But this show, it has like a clear destination that it's getting to. You know for a fact that there's a destination coming up, and you're at the beginning, and you're just along for the ride, and it feels a lot like an elongated movie, I would say. Like it's just a movie that's longer than 2 hours, which is great, because it's just it's more content. It's a longer movie. So yeah, that's I guess that's what I would say about it in terms of theme, in terms of plot and scope. Anyway, that's basic. Oh, you know, what else I can talk about in the non-spoiler section is the pretty much who the story talks about, because I mentioned, okay, there's Walt's family, and then there's him, and then there's Jesse Pinkman, the guy he's working with. That's pretty much it. The main characters are Walter White, Jesse Pinkman, who the guy he's working with, his wife, Skylar White. They have a son, but we don't really hear too much about the son. He just, like, he's more of a tertiary character. And then we have Walter's brother-in-law, who is a DEA agent, who knows about drugs, and who catches criminals who make drugs. And he's another important character. And it's basically those four. It's Walt, his brother-in-law, his wife, and Jesse. Everybody else is like revolves around them. And there's new characters that get added onto this list as like main characters as we go forward. But these are the four we keep coming back to throughout all the seasons. So yeah, that's basically, that is a taste of what you would get if you were to watch Breaking Bad, like right this second. And I highly suggest to watch it if you're someone who has not watched it. Like, it is vital, it is imperative that you go watch this show. Because it's that good. Because it will help you. It will help you understand storytelling. I'm going to say this right now, and this is the idea I'm going to come back to at the end of this review. Breaking Bad should honestly be the standard, the minimal standard for a television show. Because it's not gargantuan in budget. It's not horrendously, like, expensive show to make. Because it was cable TV. It wasn't like HBO or some shit. No, it's doable. It doesn't try to, like, overinflate itself. It doesn't just create filler and try to be, like, make as many seasons as possible. It has an end goal that it tries to get to. It has a beginning and an end. And it knows this from the beginning. You know that there's going to be an ending. You know the ending that's coming. You know, this is a story about an anti-hero with questionable ethics who's going down a dark path. How is this story going to end? Mind you, the ending to the entire series, by the way, got spoiled long before it happened. I don't think anybody doubted that what would happen ended up happening. But nonetheless, I'm going to say it in the spoiler section. And when it does happen, like, if you watch the show and when it does happen, you're going to be like, okay, yeah, it makes sense that they would end it like that. It makes perfect sense. Right, so I just lost my train of thought. What I was going to say is that the show feels that it has an endpoint. It doesn't try to fluff itself up with nonsense. And that's why I'm saying it's a minimal standard. I'm saying it's a minimal standard for television. That's what I was talking about, is because every show should be like that. Every show, at least, like, that is the least you can do, is say, okay, we're gonna do a story about this guy, and he's gonna do this, this, and this, and it's gonna end at point B. And that's gonna be our story, and we're gonna make it as cool and epic as possible, and then we're gonna sell that, and that formula should be the formula for a good television show. Instead, what they do is they have a formula for each episode, and they try to follow that they try to devote themselves to following that formula. And most of the time, the formulaic approach doesn't work. I mean, I don't like it as much in general, because in general it's done poorly. Although there are examples where it can be done well, I'm sure, like science fiction, for instance. Like Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica, and shows that I haven't really watched, but I want to because people rave about how good they are. You can't say that about most cop shows. You know, you can't say it about most cop shows because they're all they follow a formula and that's it. You can't say that about shows about doctors or lawyers or whoever. There's so many fucking shows out there. Most of them follow a very simple formula, and most of them suck, let's be honest. This is not a show about doctors or lawyers or anyone. It's a show about characters. They don't try to discriminate. You know, they give you the character. They don't give you a formula. Anyway, that's one of the immediate reasons you would know that this is a good work of fiction, because it's not formula sized like Hollywood tries to put everything through this like assembly line process of this is how to assemble a perfect work of art that will sell and get us money. But it's not how to make true art. It's not how to make true quality programming. Anyway, that's pretty much it for the spoiler section. Let me take a drink of water. I have this glass here because I know I'm going to need it as we keep going, because this is going to take like another hour at least. So, the spoiler section, I guess, okay, everything I say from here on in is spoiler material. So if you have not seen the show, stop watching the video right now, turn it off, or watch it at your own, like, you know, continue at your own expense or something. I don't know the line, but it's dangerous from here on in. You will get spoilers, and if you don't want to see spoilers, then don't watch. Don't continue. Right. The way I'm gonna do this is I'm probably gonna talk about the individual seasons and what happens in them narratively and what I think about that. And at the end of it, I can discuss the characters and what I thought about them, and conclude and summarize and maybe mention how to improve it, because I had some thoughts about that as well, because it's not a perfect show. It's not like, and when I say perfect, I don't mean perfect as it's like the best thing ever. I mean, it doesn't, even the stuff it sets out to do, it doesn't do it perfectly. I don't think it does it perfectly. I think there's a few tiny things that could be made better. Not many things, but yeah, the point is they're there and they need to be pointed out. Right, so Season 1. So Season 1 is basically like an introductory season. It's basically a season of, okay, here's the concept, here's what we're going to give you, and you know, it's very slow paced. It's a very slow paced season. You know, only even the last episode is pretty slow paced. The pacing, like, it gets more suspenseful and faster at the beginning of Season 2 than anywhere in Season 1. Even the first episode of Season 1 is pretty slow paced, even though a lot actually happens in it. What ends up happening in Season 1? Walter White finds out he has cancer. We're introduced to his whole life. He has a birthday party. Okay, that's like mundane shit. But then he goes on a DEA ride-along. He meets his fucking friend Jesse. They decide to make meth together. And at the end of the episode, they end up killing two, like, drug distributors and with chemicals and driving an RV with them. Like, you know, some shit goes down, I would say, in the first episode. But it's still, it feels boring, because all the shit that goes down, like, right at the end of the episode. And because you don't really know the characters very well, it doesn't feel as suspenseful as it would if you knew who they were, if you knew the stakes. Like, Jesse Pinkman being in danger means nothing to me right now, because I don't even know who he is. But as you keep watching, the stakes rise. And they rise, I forgot to mention this in the non-spoiler section, but the stakes, they really do rise as you go from episode to episode. So not from season to season. The suspense, the stakes go up overall. You know, not just in the sense that at the end of a season, you know, it's more climactic, but Season 4 is more climactic than Season 3, which is more climactic than Season 2. You know, the whole show follows this curve, this upward mobility, climactic curve, where everything gets really cool and epic and badass at the end. So yeah, Season 1. Yeah, the first episode is okay. I mean, it just introduces the main characters, it introduces Walter's reality, and you're not shown much more of this, other than, I mean, you kind of are, but okay, there's a real sense of mundanity in what Walter White is living in, what he's living in before he goes into the meth business. It's this whole mundanity thing. It's why he goes into it. One of my favorite YouTubers, R. Shanghai, talked about the character Walter White, and he said that this character, what he is, if you want to choose what you want to do, it could be something horrible and evil on this side, or something good and, helpful on this side, and then there's something in the middle that's just, meh. But all the stuff on this line is like stuff that's interesting, whereas where Walter White was he was along the y-axis somewhere else in the spectrum, where you don't have stuff that you want to do. All you have is mundanity, where you are living in a life where nothing is interesting to you. You're just going along because it's become a habit. How he got this way, and he's 50 years old. He's been doing this for a long time, for like a decade or more. He's been living a life of mundanity where nothing has been interesting to him. Like, excuse me. Like, he's a high school chemistry teacher, but he has a PhD in chemistry. He's a chemistry genius, but he's teaching high school. Like, how does something like that happen? That doesn't make any sense. And you find out as you go along, you actually find out a lot of it in Season 1, how he got there, and that's really what Season 1 tries to do. You find out that it's basically because things happened to him in his developmental years, when he was younger, when he was in college, when he was still really good at what he did. Things happened that made him sort of scared. He became scared. And then he spent his entire life scared. Waking up late at night, not being able to sleep, insomnia, right? Thinking about just like fearful of things that could happen, might not happen. And these are all lines that Walter White eventually says in the show. He says this in like Season 4, I think, or Season 3. He says that he spent his whole life scared. But ever since his cancer diagnosis, he sleeps just fine. Sorry. My throat is starting to itch given all the talking I'm doing. It's not going to be easy from here on in. But yeah, like that's really the character, is he spent his whole life scared because something happened to him where he just lost faith in himself and what he could do. He lost faith. Everything started to scare him. I can relate to that. I can relate to that in my own life because I have similar instincts. So that's a pretty that's interesting. Let's just say that's a fascinating character trait, and because he spent his whole life scared. Then he finds out he has cancer, and what that does to him is he stops being scared because now he thinks, I want to die anyway. Who cares? Who cares what I do? I can't do no wrong. It's like he starts living in the moment, really. He starts doing what it is that he wants to do. And that's how he starts doing meth. Now you might think, oh, well, why does he want to do that? I mean, I'm going to talk about that later in general. But the idea is, okay, the general idea behind the Walter White character, because it all gets wrapped up at the end, but a lot of people seem to misinterpret this. Everybody that watches the show that a lot of people that watch the show that I know, they all adore Walter White like he's this king, like he's trying to help his family. It's so selfless what he's doing, risking his life, doing illegal stuff to help his family, and his family isn't even grateful when they find out about it. Spoiler alert. Well, we're in the spoiler section, so whatever. But the whole point of the show, the whole idea, is that he isn't doing it for his family. Or at least that's not just it. Like, sure, that's there, but the instinct, the emotional, psychological mechanism in his brain that makes him want to do it is, so I'm just looking at the recording, is, what is it? The reason he wants to do it is because it makes him feel good, it makes him feel in charge, it makes him feel empowered, it builds his ego. It makes him feel like he wanted to feel the entire time, like he knows what's up, he gets to make decisions, he is in charge, he has power. It's an ego thing. It's not even an ego thing, it's also a passion thing, because it's something he's good at that he knows nobody else is good at. Because the meth he makes is better than any meth anybody else can ever make. It's a product. It is a quality, high quality product that nobody else can copy. And that is something that makes him unique, that makes him special, and that's what he enjoys. That's why he does it. That's why he keeps... I'm going to spoil this right now. That's why Walter White constantly keeps coming back to making meth. That's why he's so addicted to it, is because it is his own ego, it is the building of his own character, it is the self-fulfillment fantasy that he's been having for decades, ever since what happened to him when he was in college. It is everything. It is his pride, it's his passion, it's his self-fulfillment, it's his ego, it's his proof, not to the world, but to himself, that he's got it. That's why he does it all. It has the family, their interest, that's an excuse. It's something that was in his mind, his attention, he cared about that stuff, but it's an excuse. Like, the reason, he doesn't just want to be like a guy who helps his family selflessly. Like, he wants to be the guy that can take care of his family. He wants to be the man that can take care of his family, because that's his vision of what a man is. That's the character at the heart of it. That is the character. I feel like a lot of people misinterpret that because they seem to think that his actions are selfless, when they're not. They are not selfless. I'm going to put that... I adamantly drawing the line right here. Walter White is never selfless. Never. Not once. God damn it, what is that? Sorry, not once is he ever selfless in the show. Every single thing he does is selfish. Now you could argue, of course, oh, everything everybody ever does is selfish because of, you know, human nature or whatever. Even if people are altruistic, they're selfish because that satisfies their instinct to be altruistic in the first place. You could make that argument, whatever. Not the point. It is obvious. It is obvious when you watch this, because they try to hammer this in. The writers try to hammer this in your mind, that Walter White is not motivated entirely by selfless instincts. He's definitely motivated by some sort of self-actualization idea. Right, so Season 1 basically introduces Walter. It talks about everything I just mentioned. It introduces... It gives you his background, more or less, and what he goes through as he gains cancer, and his belief now that he doesn't really need to be scared anymore. It introduces his family. He has a wife who is pregnant. He has a son who has cerebral palsy, which is a horrible disease. He's a high school chemistry teacher. You know, these are all the mundane elements. His brother-in-law is a DEA agent who has this, what seems like a very fulfilling, very exciting life. He gets to, you know, bust criminals and do all this stuff. You know, there's a difference between the two of them. Hank Schrader, that's the name of Walter's brother-in-law. He's the other main, like, character. And Hank is very secure. He's not like Walt. Walt is insecure about everything at the start of the show. Hank isn't. He's got it. He's the man. He's the man that Walt wants to be. Like, this isn't obvious, but I feel like it would. But I feel like this is what would be if you were watching. I feel like this is an interpretation that makes sense given the context. I feel like Walt would, in fact, be jealous of Hank at the start of the show, where he was. I think Walt would want to be that kind of man, you know, because Hank is a man. Then you have Walt's wife. She's a character. A lot of people find her annoying, but you probably know this if you're watching the spoiler section, because then you watch the show. You probably found her annoying. I found her annoying. Everybody found her annoying. The only person who didn't find her annoying that I know of is my mother. And that's probably because, you know, she can relate. No, but I can relate as well. Like, she's annoying, but at the same time I understand Walter's wife's actions, Skylar's actions. They all make sense. It's hard to call someone annoying when they do what's in their nature. It's just who they are. So those are your four. Oh, right, and I forgot Jesse Pinkman. And we don't really know much about Jesse Pinkman now at Season 1, other than he's a drug addict, and he likes to say the word bitch a lot, and the way he says it is hilarious. And he's a cool character. But those are the 4 characters. We don't really know much about them at this point. So what season 1 does is, it introduces them. It introduces Walter's cancer and how he decides to go about that. And alright, so I'm going to talk. The first 3 episodes, basically what happens is Walter and Jesse, they start making meth inside this RV. And when they do, Jesse gets in touch with some dealers, and the dealer's name is Crazy 8. And he and a guy decide to kill Jesse and Walt, or they decide to use them to make meth. I don't remember the details. It was a while since I watched the beginning of the show, but they had an altercation. Those guys wanted to hurt Walter and Jesse, or they wanted to kill them. They were not friends. And this happens right at the start. Like, immediately as Walter starts making meth, he immediately makes a mistake, screws up, and causes, and just like everything goes wrong. Which makes a lot of sense, because he's a newbie. He hasn't done this before. He doesn't know how to do it. He doesn't know how to work the meth business. So of course he screws up, and he almost loses his life. But then he uses knowledge of chemistry to suffocate the guys that come to kill him inside the RV. So then what they have to do is they have to get rid of the bodies. One of the bodies, they melt it with hydrofluoric acid, which is ridiculously acidic. If you look at its pH scale, ridiculously acidic. It's so acidic it melts through the bathtub that they do it in, and the whole body just hits the floor, which is hilarious. Like the show, there's things like that where the show doesn't really take itself seriously. The other guy, Crazy 8, the dealer, he survives, and the first 3 episodes is basically them figuring out that they need to kill him, and Walt is the guy who has to do it because he and Jesse flip for it, and he is the one who has to do it. And that's interesting because this is like this is the first stepping stone in Walter White's path to darkness, and he doesn't want to kill Crazy 8. He has empathy, he has compassion, he doesn't want to do it. He even has compassion at the end. Walter White never actually loses empathy. He becomes numb to doing stuff like what he does to Crazy 8. So he doesn't want to kill Crazy 8. He's going to let him go. But what ends up happening is, pretty much, right, he has cancer, so he passes out, and he's bringing Crazy 8 food, who's locked up in their basement, and the plate that had the food smashes because Walter falls unconscious because he's got cancer and he's like his brain's not functioning. When he wakes up, he and Crazy 8 have a conversation. He's like, oh, Crazy 8, we have stuff in common. I love you. I'm going to release you now. I'm a good person. That's what he does. But then he finds out that the plate that smashed had, so many, it smashed into, like, jagged pieces, right? Sharp pieces that you could use to kill someone. And one of those pieces is missing, i.e., Crazy 8 picked up one of the pieces. Walter White confronts Crazy 8 about this, and Crazy 8 tries to stab him, and so he kills Crazy 8 because Crazy 8 lied to him. And that's how that happens. And that's the first stepping stone. And after this, Walter says, you know what, I'm not going to do meth. I killed a guy, I'm not going to do this, this is crazy, I'm just going to do my treatment, whatever. Then the episodes 4 and 5 are character building, and what ends up happening, right, I want to talk about episode 5 because in episode 4 we learn more about Jesse's character and how he's neglected by his parents. None of that's really that relevant, like that's just contextual stuff. The stuff that's interesting about Jesse I'll get to in season 2. It's how he deals with the things in the business, in the meth business, and the differences between how he deals with them and how Walter deals with him. In the 5th episode, we learn about Walter's past. We learn about what it is, like I mentioned. Something happened to him that made him like this, that made him want to give up, sorry, that made him scared for his entire life before he got cancer. What was the event that triggered that? What ended up happening was a series of unfortunate events during his college years. He had a PhD. He was starting a company called Gray Matter with, and that's the name of the episode, by the way, with his best friends, with his best friend and his girlfriend at the time. What happens, though, some sort of altercation between the three of them. The girlfriend, she leaves him, she goes with the friend, and Walter sells his shares of the company for $5,000. The company is now worth billions years later. So you can understand why Walter feels so inadequate, because this is what he missed out on. And it's his work, by the way, that they're using as well. Like, he's going to like a brunch, an expensive brunch held by his former friend, Elliot, who he's the friend that they started the company with, and he's there, and it's Elliot's birthday, right? And all these people there with PhDs, and they work for the company, or they teach at a university, or they're doing all this really ridiculous stuff. Meanwhile, he's teaching high school, and it's completely absurd. And you find out that Walter White actually resents Elliot and his former girlfriend for what ended up happening, because they offer to help him with treatment, and he says no because he has too much pride. And specifically, he doesn't want money, but he specifically doesn't want their money. He doesn't want their charity because he hates them, because he resents them for what happened. And that becomes relevant later as well. Because that's really his motivation for everything throughout the show. It's this. It really is this. And we rarely see Elliot and Gretchen, that's the girl, his former girlfriend that left him. We rarely see them in the show. Like, we almost never see them, actually. They're not relevant to anything that happens in the plot. They're not relevant to Walter White's path through darkness, but they are what caused it all. They are one of the big factors that led to his downfall, or his fall downwards. I wouldn't call it a downfall. Whatever. So, yeah, that's episode 5. And at the end of that episode, after going to that dinner and having this very dramatic conversation with his family, with his son, with his brother-in-law and his brother-in-law's wife, where they talk about whether Walter should get cancer treatment or not, or whether he should just die like a man rather than dying with, like, you know, tubes in his body and stuff, like some sort of vegetable, because there's that whole thing going on as well. He goes back to Jess and he's like, let's cook. Well, you killed a guy. What happened, Walt? You just killed a man. You did a horrible thing. I thought you didn't want to do this. I thought you got scared. I'm not scared of this, says Walt. He's not scared because here's his choice. It's a very simple choice. You either do that, which is scary, but also has the potential to be incredibly rewarding, or you go back to what you were, which is mundanity. You go back to the life where you are the leftovers of the whole event with Gretchen and Elliot, who are now better people than you. Beautiful people. Of course he's gonna pick the meth. Of course, and that's what triggers it. It's the meeting with his former friends that triggers it, that he goes back to it. By the way, I want to point out, this is one of the first times, there's several times throughout the series where Walt decides to leave the meth business, but then he comes back to it. This is the first time. He wants to get into it right at the beginning, then he has to kill a guy so he gets out, but then he wants to go back in simply because, and you expect him to go back in as the audience, you know he's going to get back in, but this is why he does it. He does it because of his interaction with them. And he does it because he says, I'm dying of cancer, you know what, I need to make like $700K for my family. Episode 6 and 7. Right, what happens there? Episode 6 and 7, basically Walter and Jesse start their business, and they have to find another dealer who they find. His name is Tuco, and he's basically completely crazy, and Walter, this is also the episode I want to mention where Walter shaves his head because he's losing hair because of the chemotherapy. And before that, he had like full hair. I think it's this episode. It's either this episode or the previous one. But he shaves his head, and he's bald from here on in. From here till the end of the season. And that's like, that becomes part of his character, the baldness. I don't know why, but he looks really badass when he's bald. The actor, Bryan Cranston, who does a phenomenal job, by the way. And Tuco is an asshole, and Tuco beats Jesse up when they decide to work together. But then Walt comes in with some chemical mercury fermangate or some shit, I don't know, which is explosive, and he throws it on the ground, and it blows up the entire, like, room, and he has a bag of it, and he's like, Tuco, if I drop this, we're all gonna die, so you better work with us and give, you know, the money that my friend paid for or whatever. And Tuco's fucking crazy. He's like nuts. Like, this is another interesting thing in the show, by the way, is when they introduce characters like this, even if they're not important, they're incredibly well written. Tuco's character is incredibly well written, well acted, well envisioned, even though he's not that big of a deal, really. But he's crazy. He's a drug addict, and they eventually start working together. And in episode 7, the last one in the season's very short, Jesse and Walt, they steal some methylamine from a lab, which is a chemical, and they start making meth blue. It's blue tinted, which becomes like a signature product. The meth that Walter makes is the blue meth, and everybody knows it's the blue meth, and that's why he becomes famous as a result, and he makes a name for himself, and he calls himself Heisenberg. And I think he comes up with the name here, and he also comes up with like a suit. He gets like a black suit and a hat and some glasses, and that becomes Heisenberg, like the glasses, hat, and suit. You know, it becomes like his alternate personality, alter ego, that eventually takes over as we go through the series. But yeah, the blue meth, that's his signature product, so to speak. And so basically the season ends in sort of a weird way, because we meet Tuco and they give him some money, and right at the end Tuco just beats a guy to death, and like that's the end of the season. It's bizarre because it doesn't really conclude anything. It leaves us on a cliffhanger, but it's not really a cliffhanger. Like, it's a cliffhanger when stuff is built up, and then there's like a cliff here, right? Like, you're left hanging on a cliff. You don't know what happens past this point. Like, you don't know anything that happens here. Whereas, what happens eventually in the next season is, oh, we go like this, and we... What on earth? Sorry, something's happening to the camera. I wasn't even... Anyway. Right, we see the rest of the mountain as we keep going, but the cliff is where we're at. This, however, isn't really a cliffhanger because there has to be build-up for there to be a cliff in the first place. What this is a tiny hump. This is the very beginning of development, of suspense, and it's immediately cut off because the season ends at episode 7. Like, nothing's been really built up at this point. We just got introduced to this Tuco character, and he just beat a guy up. It's not really a cliffhanger. It's just like plot elements are being set up, but they don't go anywhere. It's sloppy. I don't like it because what you do, a cliffhanger is okay for an end of a season if the show's going to continue, but it's bad if you don't have. God, sorry, I lost my train of thought. A cliffhanger is okay, but you never want to just start introducing things at the end of a season, because a season is like a section. You never just want to start introducing elements at the end. There's another work of art that does that, but another story, it's just like the end of the season or the volume, it's like, oh, let's introduce all these new characters and plot elements and all this stuff. Like why? You don't want to do that. Leave that stuff for later, or just cliffhang the stuff that's already happening. But that's not what this is. This whole Tuco thing and Tuco being crazy it's just in development. He's not actually like gonna kill him. It's not actually at the point where he's dangerous yet, and you can sufficiently cliffhang. Whatever. It's a minor little complaint, and the reason is because when they made season 1, they didn't know if the show would ever get a second season or whatever. so maybe they were on budget, they couldn't make another episode, but I honestly feel like the very first episode of season 2 should have been the ending to season 1, because it makes a lot more sense. It continues the thread that started in season 1, and it ends on a cliffhanger, like a season finale should, and then season 2 continues that cliffhanger, like the next episode. Anyway, yeah, that's basically it for season 1. It introduces the characters. That's what it's all about, and specifically Walter White. Wow, this video's already gone on for like an hour. I'm gonna try to go fast. So, right, what happens in season 2? Well, for the most part, in season 2, the plot thickens a lot, but in terms of character development, we see a lot more of the other characters. We see a lot more of Skylar, we see a lot more of Jesse, we see a lot more of Hank. What we see of Skylar, I mean, we sort of only see her in the family context, but she becomes incredibly suspicious of what Walter's doing, because, you know, he still has a day job, right? And as he's going on to make meth, you know, she takes notice of this, and that becomes a whole drama thing between the two of them in the household that constantly goes on. What happens to Hank? We find out about how about Hank's personality in the drug enforcement administration. And he basically becomes the guy who has to go after Heisenberg, the kingpin name of the guy who's making the blue meth. He becomes the guy to go after Heisenberg, and that's what really builds the suspense throughout the entire series, is the fact that Walt's brother-in-law is looking for him. But the fact that Walt is so close to his brother-in-law means that he can always stay one step ahead. The two of them aren't really going neck to neck at this point, but it's building up the idea that they might eventually, given how given sort of the role that Hank has. And Hank's abilities are very well emphasized. Like, he's a very good investigator. I think there's this particular scene with him and his boss that happens early in the season, where his boss says, "You, Hank, you're a shark," you know, because, you know, he smells blood and he just goes swimming. He does not stop until he finds the guy. And he's very good investigator. He's very clever. He likes to put details together. You know, he's intelligent. He's not like Walter. We find out that Walter is intelligent as well, and he's a genius, and he's good at manipulating people. Hank isn't necessarily Machiavellian, but he is incredibly intelligent. He's incredibly good at sifting through the details and finding out, you know, finding out the little pieces. He and Walt both have this. They both have this ability to notice little things, which is why this isn't emphasized as much as I would like for it to be, but they both are good at noticing little things, which is why it makes so much sense that they would be rivals towards one another, because they're both good at the same thing. Walt is better at perhaps manipulating people, or coming up with elaborate plots on how to manipulate a person, or how to get something done. But in terms of noticing the little things that would make us suspicious, and to know who's against us, who's for us, who's trying to kill us, they're both good at that. Hank is also really good at that. We get introduced to Jesse, and we get introduced to his family and his friends, and his family they're pretty basically intolerant of his drug use, but then his brother's using marijuana, and Jesse takes the blame for it, and then his parents kick him out of the house after having pity on him, and then they kick him out of the house that his aunt left him, the house that he and Walter were using to store the RV. And that becomes a whole thing, and there's like a whole episode where Jesse's dealing with all these problems, and everybody's left him and he's all alone. But I guess that's really his character. He's a loner as well, but different way than Walt. Walt is just scared. Jesse's not really scared, he's just, nobody loves him. That's his problem. He doesn't really have a father figure or a mother figure or anyone. He's just alone, and he's not a bad guy either. I mean, you find this out in the season, and they show this, that he is not a bad person. He has empathy. He cares about people. You know, he witnesses someone die, and he's upset about it for like, you know, an entire episode, basically. But right, where did I leave off? I was talking about Tuco. So the beginning of the season is just, it picks up where the first one left off, and it concludes this whole Tuco plot. Tuco is insane. He takes Jesse and Walt, and he's supposed to take them to the cartel so they can make meth for the cartel. God, okay, I'm really thirsty. I need to fucking make another glass here. Sorry about that. What on earth is that blinking thing? Is that my... Hold on a second. Alright, so I had to make a small edit. Anyway, where was I? Season 2. Right, so... Hank's character gets developed, Jesse's character is more developed. Moreover, Jesse and Walt's relationship becomes more developed, which is very, 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 very important in the show. Jesse and Walt's relationship. Jesse, like, they become very close. They become almost intimate. Like, Jesse needs Walt because Walt is pretty much a father figure for him. He's the only one, I mean, he puts Jesse down a lot, but it's like constructive criticism almost. You know, I feel like Jesse needs Walt to feel more secure, because Walt's intelligent, Walt knows what's going on, and in a way Walt cares for Jesse, and that's also important, and Jesse recognizes this, because his parents, you know, they've rejected him, they've cast him aside. Walt hasn't. Walt needs him. You know, that's some sort of satisfaction from that. That's why Jesse needs Walt. I'm not sure why Walt needs Jesse, but Walt really, really likes Jesse. Maybe Jesse reminds him of himself. I don't know why he would. Maybe when he was younger. Maybe he feels responsible or guilty given how Jesse... You know, Jesse was a student, but his education got him nowhere. Maybe he just likes the fact that Jesse's helping him out. I'm not sure, but he definitely takes on a father figure kind of role. And there's an episode where the two have an altercation because Jesse got kicked out of his house by his parents, his aunt's house, and he has to, he needs money to get a place to stay. And they've sold some meth, and Walt has, Jesse's already gone through his cut, so to speak. Actually, no, I don't remember the exact details. Either Jesse had already used up his money and needed to borrow some from Walt, or Walt was keeping Jesse's money until Jesse became clean because he was drunk, or he wasn't drunk, he was on drugs, and he needed Jesse to stop doing that at the time, so he was keeping his money away. And, they came to an agreement, and eventually Walt did give Jesse that money so that Jesse could find a place to stay. And Jesse finds a new house, and all of the events that he goes through take place in this new location. Meanwhile, they're still using the RV to make meth, and meanwhile, Hank is still trying to go after them after Tuco's death. He doesn't know that it's them, but he's going after Heisenberg, or the blue meth dealer. And Jesse gets 3 of his friends to help them to distribute it, and you know, Hank picks up on this, and they go after these 3 friends, and this is pretty much how it goes. The entire season sort of focuses on mostly Jesse and Walt's relationship, and the 2 of them trying to organize this meth business, and nothing much else. The only other thing that happens, the only other significant thing, is Hank. He has some things happen to him after he kills Tuco. Tuco had like diamond teeth or something, and he gets those teeth, and they get like glued into like a plastic cube, and that's given to Hank as like a treasure reward, and he throws it in the river. And there's this cute little episode where, you know, 2 Mexicans that are crossing the border find this like gem in the river, like it's real gold or it's real diamond, and they're like excited, and this happens at the start of the episode, and you don't know what the hell is going on because you've never seen these like diamond teeth in a plastic cube before. You haven't seen these Mexicans. This is nothing. And then at the end of the episode, you see Hank. He takes a thing and he throws it in the river, and you know why. It comes back to that whole thing I mentioned about the show starting off with a little scene or an intro section where it doesn't make sense until you watch the rest of the episode. So there was that. That was really cool. And Hank, he also has this thing. Oh, this is also the part where we introduce the cartel. And if you're doing drugs in the desert, you know the cartel is involved in some way. The cartel is going to be involved. And the way they're involved is Hank, who's working in the DA, he is sent to El Paso in Texas to join an anti-cartel like DEA squad or FBI squad, which is like a more advanced unit than what he was, which was just like a local investigation within Albuquerque. He becomes like, this is like the federal level or something. And he likes, in that job, basically, the cartel, they kill a guy, they kill an informant, and they strap his head to like a turtle, and they put a bomb there, and the only reason, and the bomb like kills a bunch of DEA agents, and the only reason Hank isn't blown up is because when he sees the guy's head on the turtle, you know, he almost vomits, that he has to leave the area because he has to vomit in shame that he can't take it, because you pretty much learn after this whole event. He gets like post-traumatic stress disorder, and he gets like claustrophobic, and there's all these little episodes with Hank, and pretty much what you find out about him is that he's a lot more sensitive than he makes himself out to be. In season 1, you think of him, he's like, oh, he's the tough guy that Walt is comparing himself to, but in fact he's kind of not. Like, he is the tough guy, but he also plays that up a bit more than it actually is. He's actually kind of sensitive. Like, he leaves this El Paso job because he can't take it. He starts neglecting his wife because she's afraid that there's something wrong with him, because he wants to be a man. He wants to, you know, it's emasculating to him to feel sensitive at all. You know, these are like his personal thoughts that shouldn't be showcased. And yeah, that's what you find out about him. There's something else I wanted to say about Hank. He had that he's sensitive. I also want to say that he also has a lot of pride. You find out about this from his interactions with his wife, who is Walter's wife's sister, Marie, which you should know because he's his brother-in-law. You find these interactions, like the way he reacts to things, the way he reacts to this whole El Paso thing. He doesn't want to be thought of as weak. You know, he likes the idea of pride, of being proud. In fact, it is his pride. You could even argue that his pride is even worse than Walt's, because Walt's pride isn't even a pride so much as it is an ego thing. But Walt is actually close enough to his wife. He can show weakness to his wife and get away with it. Hank cannot do that. Like, not once does he actually want to appear weak in front of Marie. He always tries to appear the man, you know, the strong man. And that's just another thing to his character. Anyway, what basically happens in the season then is Jesse ends up hooking up. So there's a lot of things that happen. For one, you know, in order to get street cred, they have to kill like a guy. They have to kill some people that rob Jesse's dealers, because if they don't, it makes them look weak, and then their whole like distribution doesn't work. Jesse hooks up with his neighbor, who's like a girl around his age, who's also an addict, and she's also trying to stop her addiction, and she ends up relapsing, and that ends up climaxing at the end of the season. And then you have Jesse and Walt's relationship, and they run into legal troubles. Oh, okay. So here's the part that I mentioned earlier, where characters get introduced and they become very important later on, and you don't know that when they get introduced. A great example of this is Saul Goodman. He gets introduced in this, like in the middle of this season. He's incredibly important, as you find out later. Like, he becomes very central to the plot. It wouldn't work without him. And he's also sort of becomes like the comic relief character a lot of the time. In fact, basically all the time. He's almost always a comic relief character, as well as a plot instrument. So that's nice. He's not really a thematic character. I can't really... It's hard to say that he is. There are situations where he is a thematic character, but... Actually, yeah, he is a thematic character, but I'll get to that later. I'll get to that when I talk about Season 4. Then you introduce... Who else do we introduce? We introduce Gus Fring. So, eventually, one of the dealers that work for Jesse gets killed by some other gang who also deal drugs. He got killed on their corner. So what ends up happening, you know, Jesse's other two friends, they don't want to work for him anymore. They don't want to deal drugs. It's too dangerous. So Jesse and Walt, they have to find a distributor like they did before. And they talk to Saul Goodman, their new lawyer, and who, by the way, he's a sketchy lawyer. He's not a by-the-book, oh yeah, I'm a lawyer. No, he's a criminal lawyer, not in the sense that he represents criminals, but in the sense that he himself is a criminal. Which is why he gets them in touch with Gus Fring, who is this meth kingpin in Albuquerque, or meth distributor in Albuquerque. He spent all these years building his own distribution, and this guy, yes, he wants to sell meth. And when Walt comes to him and they decide to sell meth, it becomes a very profitable venture for the both of them. And that develops into things later on. There's basically nothing else to talk about in the season. The way the season ends has to do with Walter and Jesse's relationship and how it relates to Jesse hooking up with his neighbor, Jane, who's also a drug addict. Now that's important because she has a relapse, and because of that relapse, Jesse has a relapse, and he starts doing more drugs, and because of that, he becomes less functional, and less capable of helping Walt, and as a result, they can't make their deal with Gus Fring go down, because Gus is very, very careful. He doesn't want to work with someone like Jesse, who is a drug addict, and this makes it hard for Walt, who wants to make money, of course. And this becomes a whole issue, and this is what the entire season ends up concluding to, is Jane also has issues with her father. Basically, you get this entire idea that the way Walt tries to free Jesse of Jane's grip, pretty much, because she's a drug addict and she's a bad influence. Meanwhile, Jesse, she has a father, and he's pretty much the same. He wants Jane to stop doing drugs, and that's what he's trying to accomplish. And they pretty much approach it the same way. He doesn't like her spending time with Jesse because he thinks Jesse's a bad influence. Nonetheless, the real bad influence, I think, is Jane, given what we see. She ends up figuring out that Jesse has a lot of money, that he's a drug dealer, and she ends up manipulating Walt Walt's affection towards Jesse in order to extract money from him so that the two of them could use it to buy more drugs or leave the country or whatever. Walt doesn't want to do this, of course, but he agrees to do this, except what ends up happening is he finds the two of them in bed, having just done a bunch of drugs, lying on their side, so that if they throw up, they throw up to the side. And he tries to wake up Jesse because he wants to say sorry or something, or he wants to talk, or it's some nonsense, but it's a very emotional moment. And then he accidentally knocks Jane to the side, and he knocks her back on her back, like she's she's lying on her side, and he knocks her back like this, accidentally, and she starts to vomit, and of course she's vomiting upwards like this, so it's all like it's not leaving her body, it's just going down into her throat and choking her. And Walt, he sees all this, but he doesn't save her because she's a bad influence and he wants her gone, so that he and Jesse can be friends again. So he just does nothing, and it's this very... it's a pretty dark moment. The season overall is actually the darkest of all of the season, I would say. There's a lot of like when Jesse has to take out the people who robbed his dealers, he has to go to like their house, which is this like rundown crack den. After Jane's death, which she dies here, right? He ends up in another crack house, which is really dark. There's like a whole plane crash where a bunch of people die. It's a really dark season for some reason. There's too many dark things that happen. I don't know why the writers... like, it's almost too dark than it should be, I would say. Especially with the plane crash thing happening. Anyway. Right, so the reason I'm bringing this up is that this is a stepping stone in Walter White's journey. And another important thing is Walter never tells Jesse about what happened to Jane. As far as Jesse knows, he wakes up and she choked. It was an accident, not that Walter was there and that he did nothing to stop it. He does not tell Jesse about this, not for a while at least, which is an important point. You know, this whole relationship, it emphasizes their relationship, and as well as what's happening to Walt. And as he's becoming more and more numb to this business, this world, that he just ends up, he stops having empathy for people, and he starts looking at people as just tools. I mean, he has clearly empathy for Jane, but he stops himself from saving her because he knows that she needs to disappear, that she's bad for him, for his business, for his work. She is bad. Speaking of Walt, there's one thing I really forgot to mention. I can't believe I forgot to mention it because it's so important. Okay, there's two things. One thing, there's actually a small flaw in this season. At least when my mother watched the show, she thought there was a lot of flaws. She thought the whole idea of Walt being involved in the business as incredibly ridiculous because there's like a scene where Walt meets with the dealers that Jesse's working with, which is ridiculous if you think about it, because the whole point of Walt is that he has to remain anonymous. Nobody knows who Heisenberg is. The only person who interacts with him is Jesse. The only person. Nobody else sees his face. Nobody else knows what he looks like, who he is. Here he comes to these dealers and he says, "Oh yeah, I'm Heisenberg, by the way." And like that's that. And it's crazy because you would think that he'd be more cautious. I mean, I want to say this was a flaw, and the reason he meets with the dealers, by the way, he didn't want to do it, obviously, is because after going to the crack house where his dealers were robbed, Jesse sees a guy get killed there, and he's like ridiculously sad and upset, and he's going through this whole traumatic moment. And this is when we learn about Jesse's character and how sensitive he is towards people and human suffering. And he doesn't want to do anything. He's just lying in bed, he's all depressed, and Walt has to do the work. And I feel like Walt would be more cautious. Like, I understand the entire idea of this moment, but like I understand why they did the scene and why this happened, but I feel like it shouldn't have happened. I feel like the real Walter would have just not done the business and not met with the dealers. I feel like the real Walter would have suspended the work and been more cautious, because the whole point was that he never see their faces. They never see his faces. They can't identify him, period. That was the idea. And a few small flaws like that. The other big thing I want to say about Walter is there's another moment in the season where he decides to stop doing meth. And that is when he finds out that he does not have cancer anymore, that the treatment has worked. Uh-oh, what happens then? He finds out that he has no cancer. But after finding this out, he is angry, he is upset, he is punching like metal, like hand dryers, he is all over the place. He's like trying to do stuff at the house. He's trying to like fix the pipes. He's just trying to do something with himself because he doesn't know what to do anymore. Because it's like, oh, I can't go back to that. Obviously, I can't go back to doing drugs. That stuff's horrible, evil, it's dangerous. Why would I want to go back to that? But he wants to do something. He doesn't want to live in fear anymore. He can't go back to being his previous self, the mundane self that he used to be. He can't. He's a different person now. He's seen things. He's done things. He's been courageous. He has seen the world without fear. He cannot go back. Nonetheless, he tells Jesse, I'm out. I'm done. Drug's over. You know, I don't have cancer. I won't die, so I can make money, you know, the fair way. But, oh, right, I want to mention, there's actually a terrific scene here where, he has a party. There's a party going on because after having figured out he had no drugs, they threw a party to celebrate, oh, look, Walter is cured. And at the party, he makes his son drink alcohol. And when Hank, who's there, Hank is like, you know what, Walt, you should probably stop. You know, you shouldn't just like force feed him whiskey. Walt continues. He's crazy. He wants, because he feels like, you know, he feels like this is Hank puffing his chest, like he's an alpha male and he's being challenged. And Walt doesn't want to be unmanned anymore. He doesn't want to be emasculated. He wants to feel strong, so that's what he does. And they get into like an argument, and it's just this beautiful scene. It was a great episode. The entire episode, what Walt does after finding out he doesn't have cancer, it's beautiful because it shows the thought process. The character, it demonstrates that he actually enjoyed what it is that he did. It wasn't just about the family, it was enjoyment, it was self-fulfillment. And at the end of that episode, there's a scene, Walter's going to like Home Depot to get building materials because he wants to improve the house or something, and he notices somebody buying all these chemicals, which he knows are chemicals used in the production of meth, and he notices this guy, and he like arrogantly comes to him and gives him tips on what he should actually use because he knows what this guy's gonna do. And then this poor like 20-year-old like loser who's trying to make meth gets scared. He runs outside to his like massive ass, like, you know, huge muscles, tough guy boss who told him to buy all that stuff. And Walt comes in and he sees the two of them and is like, oh, okay, these are the guys making the meth business. He walks up to them and he says like very ominously, stay out of my territory. And that's a famous line. Everybody who's watched the show remembers that scene because it was beautiful, because it's the type of badassery that we all wish we could do. Like, Walt is not just, like, there's another scene in season 1, or was it season 2? I don't remember, but there's another thing. Like, Walt was in like a car at a gas station. He kept running into this guy at the bank, this like guy with a Bluetooth who kept talking to someone at his company, and he was like clearly rich, he was well dressed, and he was just an asshole. The guy was an asshole, he was belligerent, he kept talking very loudly. Walt hated him. So what he did was he took the soapy like squeegee thing at a gas station that he used to wash the windows, and he stuck it into the guy's open hood and set his car on fire as a result. And it was just such a cathartic moment because, like, we've all felt like Walter White. We've all felt this mundanity thing. And Walt's the only guy who says, screw the rules, I'm gonna do what I want. I'm gonna do what I want and be a badass. And that's why so many people feel connected to the character. I think it's because of stuff like that. And this happens again in the scene I was talking about in season 2. Anyway, the last thing I wanted to talk about, in this season was the pink teddy bear and what ends up happening to Jane. So after Jane's manipulating Jesse, Walt meets Jane's father in a bar. Now, they don't know each other. They meet in a bar accidentally, and they have this conversation. Walt's like, oh yeah, my son or my nephew, he's going through troubles, I need to help him, and Jane's father's like, oh yeah, my daughter's going through troubles, I need to help her, and they connect on this moment. They don't know each other, and they don't identify one another's, nephew and daughter, so it's like they don't know each other at all, but they have this weird philosophical discussion about like the fatherly role and stuff, and that ties into Jesse and Walt's relationship and the strong connection they have there. And then afterwards, what Jane's father does when she dies is he's an air traffic controller. And what he ends up doing, and I mentioned the plane crash, what he ends up doing is he ends up screwing up his air traffic controlling stuff, and there is a plane that ends up just crashing or breaking over Albuquerque, and the pieces scatter all over Albuquerque. One piece is a pink teddy bear. Well, a bunch of the pieces fall into the Walter White's backyard, and one of the pieces is this pink teddy bear. Half of his face is like charred off, burnt off, and you see in the thing this pink teddy bear. You see this teddy bear throughout the season. At the start of each episode, you see this pink teddy bear in black and white. You don't know what it's for, and you see like you see parts of the scene. You see the Walter White backyard and debris lying around. And you don't know any of this, and only at the end of the season do you see that it's like the plane that crashed, and all this like corpses and stuff, and it's like horrible. It's just really weird. It's this weird foreshadowing, like thematic thing. I don't know why it's done. It's hard to think about. You could say that it ties into theme stuff like choice, or it's a foreshadowing. You could definitely think of it as a foreshadowing about bad stuff that's to come. Although I think Vince Gilligan mentioned that it represents all the shattered and the debris represents the chaos that will ensue, and the chaos in which Walt finds himself now with his family and his life now. It's it's basically, it's the castle beginning to crumble, I'd like to say. I think it's more of a symptom of the castle beginning to crumble than a vision of what it is crumbled. It's crumbled at the end of Season 5, I'll tell you that. It's completely crumbled at the end of Season 5. This is like hardly crumbled at all. Anyway, yeah, so that's the ending to Season 2. Season 2 is probably the darkest season. So you have all that character development and foreshadowing, and the ending isn't that epic. It's not like climactic, but it resolves the story that happened. It explains the pink teddy bear, it finishes Jane's story and her father's story, and it's dark, and it introduces a few new characters, but the plot is never about them. It introduces Saul and Gus and Mike, who's a guy who works for Saul. It introduces these three characters who are very, very important later on, but none of them become important here. They're just peripheral. They just do things, and you don't know. It doesn't lead to anything, but it will lead to something else in this. But my point is that the season has, like, its focus is better than the first season. The first season, the ending didn't feel like a cliffhanger as it should have. It didn't feel like a cliffhanger or a resolution. It felt like the start of something. This ending did not feel like the start of something. Anyway, well, it kind of did. It was more of a cliffhanger-y type of moment at the end of Season 2, because at the end of Season 2, Walter's wife finds out that he's been making drugs, because she finds out he has 2 cell phones. That was the big cliffhanger. Okay, wow. I do not want to keep doing this. I should go fast. We're on Season 3 now. Okay, Season 3. I like Season 3. Season 3 is where it really kicks up. Like, the stakes get a lot higher. For one, Walter's wife, she's mad as hell at him now. She wants him to leave the house, because he's like evil or whatever. He's making drugs. Hank is getting closer to finding out who Walt and Jesse are, and then you have this Gus Fring character who's in play, and the cartel is in play. So you have all of these elements. Oh, they also introduced Ted Beneke, who is Skylar's boss, because she goes back to work to pay for Walt's treatment. Walter needs money, she goes to work, and they introduce her boss, Ted Beneke, who's laundering money. So he's not laundering money, he's stealing money from the company he's working for, and she helps him do that because they're like old friends or something. He becomes important in season 4. Like, all of these little things, this is like a character thread that doesn't seem to matter right now, but it ends up leading to something eventually, so it's actually important. What else do you have? So yeah, there's Walt's family trouble. First he leaves the house, then he comes back to the house, and that's pretty much the end of that. He doesn't spend significant time living in his other house, not in this season. Then he pretty much, right, so he's working for Gus Fring now, but he decides to leave Gus Fring given that his family finds out that he's in trouble. And this is the third time that Walt leaves the business, the third goddamn time, and he comes back to it again, as you will see. And for the same reason he came back to it the other 2 times, because of ego, because of self-fulfillment, because of pride, because of all that stuff. What ends up happening? His wife, who's mad at him now, sleeps with her boss. And they have this whole romantic relationship going on. And she tells Walt, you know, I fuck Ted. That's actually the title of an episode. IFT. I fuck Ted. That's what she says to Walt at the end. I love the little Easter eggs like that. IFT. Anyway, so yeah, she tells Walt this, and Walt is obviously upset, and he goes to Ted, and he's gonna like beat the guy up, but then he gets taken out of there by Mike, who works for Saul, and Saul wants Walt to go work for Gus. Why? Because Saul Goodman is Walt's lawyer, and he's only making money if Walt is in the business. You know, Walt is the rock star, he needs money. That's Saul's motivation in all this. And he's sort of the buffer between, Saul is sort of like the buffer connecting point between the criminal world that Walt is part of and the family world that Walt's part of. He's the midway point. At least that's the sensation that I felt. Right. Meanwhile, there's Jesse. Walt puts Jesse in rehab, and Jesse actually gets better, and he gets money, and he buys the house, his aunt's house that his parents put on sale. So stuff's going well for him. And he wants to make meth again, but Gus won't have it, right? Gus doesn't want... Like, Gus has his own cook, and he has this massive lab. They're not using the RV anymore. He has this massive lab. He has this cook named Gale Boetticher, who's a really passionate, like, chemistry genius as well. Not as big as a genius as Walt, but he's pretty smart. And Walt has to work with him because Gus doesn't want to work with Jesse, right? So Walt's okay with this. Except what ends up happening, Walt doesn't want to work with Gus, right? Walt doesn't want to because he wants to make things well with his wife. So what ends up happening? Jesse wants to work, he wants to make the blue meth, and he's worked with Walt for a while now, so he knows the formula. He uses the formula, he makes the meth, he sells it to Fring. What Fring does is he gives Jesse half the cut, he gives the other half to Walt. Why does he do this? Because he knows, he made this prediction, because he uses it sort of as an incentive to get Walt back into the business, to get Walt interested again. That's why he sent him the money. And what he didn't take into account, but what mattered anyway, was the fact that Walt has an incredible sense of pride and connection towards the product of the meth itself. Like, that is part of his identity. The blue meth is part of Heisenberg. It's part of Heisenberg's identity. So he feels connected to it. When he learns that Jesse can make it, he's actually appalled. Walt is pissed off when he learns this. He thinks, oh, this is subpar. This product is horrible, Jesse. You did a horrible job. Even when in reality it's the exact same thing, because Jesse knows the formula. The reason Walt says that is because he doesn't care. He's insulted by the fact that Jesse's trying to be as cool as him. So he's pissed off by that. So then, when Gus sends him the money, and when Gus sends him the money and Jesse's trying to make that product, Walt goes back to Gus and he's like, you know what? Yeah, fine, let's do it. I'm gonna make all the meth. I'm gonna show Jesse who's boss. He and Jesse get into a fight about this, and then he goes to Jesse and he's like, ha, bitch, you know, I'm making all the good meth now. You have fucking nothing. And Saul obviously wants money as well, so he's gonna go with Walt. So Jesse has nothing. Jesse lost everything. He can't make meth. He's just done. He's out of the business because he and Walt had this fight. Because Walt's like, no, I come first. So he's forcing Jesse out so that he could have like all this pride and credit, because Jesse dared to try and make the great product that he did. And that's how Walt gets back into business for the third time. Again, it's because of ego and pride. So that's really interesting. And of course, at this point, if you're watching, I'm probably upset, you know, because I like the Walt-Jesse team. I like the fact that the two of them like each other. I don't want them to fight and be angry. So how do they get back together? Well, what ends up happening is Hank, he's doing his investigation. He finds out about the RV. He finds Jesse, he finds the RV, and he's like, okay, I'm going to check out this RV. Jesse, of course, calls Walt, and he's like, okay, we got to get rid of the RV. Walt calls Saul, and they figure out a way to do this, and there's a whole tense moment where Jesse and Walt are both inside the RV. Hank is right outside the door, and they're giving him, like, reasons why he can't enter the RV, because it's like, it's private property or something ridiculous, and they're at, like, a junkyard about to smash the thing up so that it doesn't, so that there's no evidence, right? And then Jesse or Walt, they make a fake phone call to Hank's phone, informing that Marie's at the hospital, and Hank gets scared and he has to run off. And in that time, the RV gets destroyed and the evidence they get rid of it. And it's this really awesome, very tense moment because Walt is in the RV and Hank can't find out that he's there. So that was a cool section. I love that. You know, the show periodically, they have these like very suspenseful gems. They get built up slowly, but they're really cool when they happen. So then Hank thinks, oh, okay, so Jesse set this up. He lied to me about my wife in the hospital. He is really mad. He goes to Jesse. He beats the shit out of him. Jesse ends up in the hospital. Jesse goes to Saul, and he's like, all right, let's press charges. Like, Hank loses his weapon. Hank, it's on, like, probation now. He can't, or, like, he's suspended as a cop. He can't just, like, go back to work. Walt, of course, cares for his brother-in-law. He doesn't want Hank to lose his job. He doesn't want there to be like legal action. So Saul's like, oh, okay, well then you have to placate Jesse so that he doesn't go after Hank. And that's how Jesse gets back into the business. Then Walt goes to Gus and he's like, Gus, I don't want to work with Gale Boetticher. I want to work with Jesse Pinkman. And that's how they end up working together again. And you know, all these little plot threads coming together. It's like, it's really cool. It's really cool to see stuff like this happen, because Walt and Jesse are like the dream team. What happens next? Okay, so what happens next is the cartel becomes reintroduced. Basically, Tuco had some cousins, and Tuco's cousins, along with his uncle, they want revenge, and those cousins, they cross the border to kill Walter White, because they think, because they're the uncle who was actually with Tuco when Walt and Jesse escaped Tuco's grasp, the uncle says, oh, Walter White was responsible. Granted, so the cartel comes in and they're trying to kill Walt, and the only reason they don't do it, they don't succeed, is because Gus stops him, because Gus values Walt. Gus needs Walt's help to make all the meth. And Gus has connections to the cartel. And instead, he sends the cartel after Hank, right as Hank loses his weapon for attacking Jesse. However, as he sends the two cousins after Hank, he also warns Hank with a anonymous phone call, and Hank defends himself and ends up killing the two of them. But he ends up getting shot a bunch of times and in the hospital, and like he can't walk, and that becomes like this whole character thing in season 4. Not the point. The point is, it thickens the plot more, because you find out about this relationship between Gus and the cartel, that they don't actually like each other. Gus specifically manipulated the cartel to attack the DEA agent because he knew, and then he warned the DEA agent because he wanted Hank to survive, because he knew that if that happened, the U.S., like the feds or whoever, like the anti-cartel groups, they would go after the cartel that had the two cousins in Albuquerque that attacked this DEA agent, and they would just go in there and kill them all, like, as criminals. And that's what ended up happening. The guy, the cartel boss, not the big boss, not like the kingpin in Mexico, but one of the cartel bosses who was responsible for putting that guy's head on the turtle in season 2, who was responsible for sending the two cousins north of the border so that they could kill Jesse as like revenge or whatever. It was like revenge honor thing that's going on, so they could kill Walter. You know, that guy gets killed by police. He gets shot, and his whole like house gets raided, and everybody gets shot because of, you know, like reverse action, disciplinary, not disciplinary, but like immediate action that gets taken because a DEA agent in America got attacked by cartel people that were linked from that, you know, from that group. All manipulated by Gus. You learn a lot this season that Gus is very, 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 very good at manipulating people. Like, ridiculously good. He becomes more of a character. And that's really the thing I would say here, is that Gus becomes another huge character. If you look at interviews between the guy who played Gus, because Gus is also, he's one of the characters that just sticks with you. A lot of the characters in this show are very memorable because of how well they're written. Gus is another one, and he's also very well acted, because he's sort of, he doesn't do anything. Like most characters, you know, they're on screen, they're talking, they're doing something. They're doing something though. Gus doesn't do something, he just does nothing. He just sits there and stares at the other person. Like, that's it, calmly, like this, with a frown on his face. He doesn't smile, he doesn't do anything, he just stares. Every once in a while he'll deliver a line of dialogue, but that's it. It is calm, silent, cautious, monotone, like, calculated. It's very cool. Oh, he also, using all this, he also manipulates Walt to try and get into the business, and Walt comes to his house, and he tells Walt like that he has a family as well, and he cooks a meal, and he talks about what it means to be a man who provides for his family, all in a sense to convince Walt to cook meth. Something that benefits him. This is where you learn that how good Gus is at manipulating people. Because this is what he does. He's figured out who Walt is, what Walt cares about, this pride, this ego, and he's using it. Of course, he doesn't... he underestimates one thing about Walt, as we'll get to that in the end. Skylar and Walt eventually get closer because she eventually realizes that the money Walt is making is needed in order to pay for Hank's treatment now that he's paralyzed from the waist down. So that becomes a whole thing. What else happens? Right, so that's basically all the character stuff that happens. Oh, there's also all, like, Hank's character, Hank goes through a very sad period after losing feeling in his legs. Like, he is so demotivated because he feels so emasculated. He feels so unmanned. Like, that was before when he couldn't take El Paso. Now he's like, he can't even walk. He took out 2 cartel guys, which was badass as hell, but he can't walk now. You know, and anytime Marie tries to help him, he just, like, barks at her like a dog. Like, he doesn't like being treated as less of a man. You know, that whole thing is it's transparent throughout. Anyway, the ending of this season is a much stronger example than the previous 2 of a climactic ending. Like, the end of season 1, not climactic at all, just meh, whatever. The end of season 2, fairly climactic, but the climax ended. Everything got resolved. Season 3 ending, climactic, but there's a cliffhanger. It's different. And, I'm sorry, I need to, my throat is constantly itchy as I'm talking. I should probably talk slower. So there's the episode 12, which is called Half Measures, and there's episode 13, which is called Full Measure. And the two of them are related to each other. What ends up happening, Jesse finds out that one of the dealers working for Gus is the ones that shot his friend Combo, who was his dealer back in season 2. And that's when their whole operation, season 2, fell apart. Not only that, he finds out that they're using an 11-year-old kid to do the killing. That they were using an 11-year-old to work for them. Like, it was ridiculous. It was horrible. And Jesse cares about kids. You actually see this in season 2, which makes me think that the entire, like, all the events of season 4 were planned out long in advance. Because in the scene where Jesse goes to deal with the people who stole money from him, they have a kid in that house, and that kid is, like, naked and not being taken care of, and Jesse, like, calls child services or whatever, and because he feels so sorry for the kid. And you see the connection Jesse has, like, with this kid he barely knows. And then you see that again here. Jesse gets really passionate about what these dealers are doing because they're using a kid. You know, this is something he's really sensitive about. You saw this back in season 1 as well, when he took the blame from his parents for something his brother did, who was a younger kid. Maybe that's the reason why. That's the connection. But it's just interesting. So Jesse gets all riled up, and Gus obviously doesn't like this. These are his dealers. They need to play along. So he tells them, okay, don't use the kids anymore. So what those dealers do is they just shoot the kid. They just kill him. Jesse's, of course, oh my god, these guys are monsters. He decides to kill them. And Walt, well, before I get into that, I want to mention here that this is where we find out more about Mike Ehrmantraut. He's a character. He was the one working for Saul to clean up the mess after Jane died in Jesse's apartment. You think he's working for Saul. You find out now that he's actually working for Gus. That's how Saul knows him. That's how Saul got in touch with... That's how Saul knew about Gus in the first place, was Saul knew Mike and Mike knew Gus. Mike is like is Gus's head of security. And there's stuff to do with his character as well. He's not evil. He's not good. He does a lot of bad things, and he has a temper, so to speak. But when it comes to the business, when it comes to the meth business, any business, he has this very adamant sense of professionalism. He has this very adamant sense of, like, okay, you know, these are my guys that work for me. I vetted them, I know them, I trust them, you know, they are on my side. I will not turn against them. And they will not, so long as they don't turn against me. And they should not turn against me. You know, he has this whole, like, loyalty thing in his head that he's really against. And he comes to Walt in the episode Half Measures, and he talks to Walt and tries to explain to him how this Jesse kid, is crazy and a lost cause, and how he should just leave it be. Just, like, forget about Jesse and not bother with this whole thing, because if it ends up badly, Jesse's gonna end up dead, because Gus is gonna kill him, because of course Gus doesn't want, like, madmen like Jesse in his organization. But of course, Jesse doesn't care about any of that, and he's gonna kill those two dealers because they killed the kid who was working for them. Walt, of course, beats Jesse to the punch. Jesse's like, there's this, like, confrontation that they're about to have in the dark, Jesse's about to walk up to those two dealers, and out of nowhere, at the end of the episode, half measure, Walter's car just comes barreling in through the side, runs them over both, and then he shoots one of them in the head. Like, cold-blooded. This is like the 4th or 5th person that Walt's killed in the series. And then he's like, run. He just tells Jesse just one line, run. And it's at this point that Gus and Walt have a falling out. Because Gus realizes it was Walt's relationship with Jesse that made the falling out happen, but it's because Gus realizes Walt is talented, Walt is good at making meth, he has ego, he has pride, he is dangerous. This is what he figures out. Walt is dangerous because of what he is willing to do, because he wants control. This is what Gus becomes fearful of. Walt turned against his guys, Gus's guys, Mike's guys, without a second thought to help Jesse, knowing that Gus couldn't kill him because he's the one making the meth. Now this is bad because it means that Walt isn't just this happy employee trying to make money. He's someone who thinks he can make the rules. This cannot happen for Gus. He's the guy who makes the rules, not Walt. Moreover that, Walt can't make the rules because he's too crazy. His rules will self-destruct. And this is what the show's trying to emphasize at this point, is that Walt isn't doing things within reason. He's too ambitious, he's too egotistic, he just thinks he can do it all. And he's smart, he's capable, he's incredibly intelligent, but it's too much. It's ridiculous. And this specifically, you don't just kill two guys like that. You just don't do certain things because you want to keep things as stable as possible. Walt is not a stable... He does not run the business stably. The one difference between Gus and Walt and how they do business is that Gus is very cautious. Gus is very calculated. Walt is intelligent and he knows how to protect himself, but he's not as cautious because he takes way more risks now. That's what's happened to his characters. He takes risks. He is less cautious than Gus is, and he takes so many risks that it's no longer constructive, that it's destructive, I guess. That's why they have an altercation, and what basically happens at the end of the season is that Gus decides, okay, I have to kill Walt. I can't work with this guy anymore, and he knows way too much about the business, so you can't have him alive. He's an enemy. He needs to die. Walt, of course, knows this is coming, so he gets Jesse to kill Gale Boetticher, because Gus can't kill Walt because Walt's the only one who can make the blue meth. So he gets Gale back into the business, into the lab, so that Gale can learn from Walt how to make the meth, and then he can kill Walt, and then Gale can just make the meth because he trusts Gale. They can work together. Right, but as Walt is about to die, he's being taken by Mike into the lab so that they could kill him and get rid of his body, Walt tells Jesse to kill Gale, and that's how this season ends. It ends with a gunshot as Jesse pulls the trigger to kill Gale Boetticher, perfectly innocent, chemistry boy, and he does this, and this saves Walt's life because Gus can't afford to stop production. That's what ends up happening, and this sets the tone for season 4. And in season 4, oh my god, things get fucking ridiculous. The amount of suspense, the amount of the tension, the amount of hype and suspense that gets built as you near the end is so much greater than the other seasons, which is why I was saying that the suspense in this show it crescendos, it keeps rising. Season 4 is by far the best season. The last 4 episodes of season 4 are the best things you will ever see on television, I swear. So in the first episode, you have the box cutter episode where Gus kills Victor for trying to make the meth that Walt makes. or for being seen when he went to Gale's apartment or something. Hank, this entire time, he's like collecting minerals and shit. You know, he's trying to do something while he can't move his legs or while he's learning to walk. We find out more about Mike because we find out he's unwilling to betray Gus. As he and Walt have a certain conversation, Walt's like, oh, okay, Gus just killed Victor with a box cutter, Mike, you know, you could be next. And Mike just kicks Walt's ass. He's like, no way, you know, Walt, get out of here. Because Mike, you know, he has that whole loyalty thing going on. He's not going to turn against his boss, not when they have an understanding, a trust. Oh, another thing I forgot to... Actually, no, I'll get to that later. So then you have Jesse. What happens to his character? He gets super depressed again. He starts doing drugs again. He starts having parties at his house, like ridiculous parties, because he's mourning over Gale's death, because this affected him, like, deeply. Meanwhile, Walt, he's sort of patching stuff up with his family. Like, he's on better terms with his wife. There's like one intimate conversation that Walt had with Walt Jr., with his son, that I wanted to talk about, but I don't really remember it. It's when he talks about his father. It's somewhere in this season, but it's where Walt talks about his father and how his father died and how it was like this horrible medical process. Oh, and it's like Walt's cancer might be coming back again, or there's something like that. But yeah, the way Walt's father died was, you know, it's like a death. It's like he died with a cancerous disease or something, but it was very horrible. Like, he was weak, he was bedridden, he looked disgusting, he didn't even look human. And Walt remembers him, and that's the last thing he remembers. And he has this very intimate conversation with his son where he says, I don't want that to be the last thing you remember of me. And I really like that. That was a touching scene, because it showed that despite all the things Walt's done, he still does care about his family. That still is one of his motivations, as well as the fact it does show that he does have a lot of sort of personal selfish instincts here, given that, you know, he doesn't want to appear like that, because that's not prideful, that's not masculine, that's not what a man does. I keep using this phrase, that's not what a man does, but I want to emphasize that the show isn't really about masculinity. It's about pride and ego, more than it is masculinity. The reason I keep using the phrase is because that's what the characters believe it means to be a man. Like, it's where their pride and ego comes from, is that belief about themselves, about what it means to be, you know, a man, an individual, a worthy, respected individual of their gender. Sorry. What else happens? Hank eventually starts investigating Gus Fring. Hank eventually figures out, somehow, I think he figures out that the blue meth is coming from Gus, that Gus is the one distributing it. Oh, he finds this out through Gale Boetticher. Gale Boetticher was like a chemistry genius. He thinks Gale Boetticher is Heisenberg. But then he has a conversation about this with Walt, and Walt tells him, oh, and we have this very, like, he's looking at all of Gale's manuscripts, and there's this line in the in one of Gale's books that says, to WW, you know, he's like, I dedicate this poem or this book, it's like, it's some famous novel, I forget the name, to WW, and he says some very endearing phrase about WW, and WW is of course Walter White, because Gale loved Walter. Like, he thought Walter was a genius, he loved him, he adored him, he respected him. It was meant to him. Hank doesn't know this, of course. And Walter suggests that maybe Gale used somebody else's work. That's what he says, that's what he thinks, because Hank possibly thinking that this guy is Heisenberg is such an insult to Walter, because he's Heisenberg, he's the one who did all the work. And this was a mistake, because what this did was it meant Hank starts digging further, and he figures out that the blue meth is still coming, and it's coming from Pollos Hermanos, which is the drug front. It's a restaurant chain owned by Gus that is a front for the drug operation. It sells like fried chicken or something, and that becomes the Hank's whole arc for this season. He starts investigating that and getting very close to blowing the lid open on Gus, Walt, the entire affair. And you find out that Pollos Hermanos, the restaurant chain, is actually part of a much bigger company called Madrigal Electromotive, and they are actually aware of what Gus is doing, and Gus actually has connections there, and those guys become relevant in Season 5. I'll get to that later. The only other thing left to mention is what Gus does to try and beat Walt, because he recognizes now that Walt is a threat that needs to be removed. Like before, he was just a liability, maybe. I mean, I would say he thought Walt as a threat after Half Measures, but now he really needs to get rid of Walt. So what he does, right, but he thought, but then Walt killed Gale, and, you know, forced himself back into business, clearly proving the idea that Walt is an adversary. He's not someone you can do business with. He is in it to win it. And the way he does it is he drives a wedge between Jesse and Walt. He strikes at the heart of the entire show at this point, which is the relationship between those two characters, as he unravels it. That's how good Gus is at manipulating people, as he tries to drive those two apart. And he almost succeeds. The only thing is, Walt is slightly better a manipulator than he is, and actually beats him at it. So what ends up doing is he gets Jesse out of this whole drug use, partying nonsense thing by giving him jobs to do with Mike, working for the organization. And he boosts Jesse's confidence in that way, and gets him, he sort of becomes, he gives him positive reinforcement, basically, which is something Jesse really needs, because that's something he never got. And he's not getting it from Walt now, because Walt, who's just fighting for his life this entire season, he gives Jesse some poison, and he wants Jesse to kill Gus. That's all he wants. But Jesse doesn't do it, not immediately, because Gus does the whole manipulation thing with him that he did with Walt before. He takes him to his house, he boosts his ego, he gives him confidence, he tries to, you know, when they have dinner together, he talks to him like they're associates, like they're both men, like they're both allies, like that Jesse merits respect. He gives Jesse respect and attention, and Jesse's surprised by this at first. He's like, whoa, well, why are you giving me this stuff, Gus? Like, I'm no longer just a druggy bitch. And then Gus, like, he has a perfect response to that. He's like, he smiles, and he's like, oh yeah, oh, by the way, when he's manipulating this is also the only time that Gus actually has, like, this is the only time Gus is playing a role, is when he's manipulating. Most of the time, when he's not manipulating, when he's just like himself in scenes on his own, he just does nothing. But yeah, here he's smiling, and he tells Jesse, no, look, you know, I like to think that I see things in people or something, and he gives Jesse the idea that he sees something in him, something that's worth nurturing and keeping. And Jesse buys all this shit. All of this really is an excuse to get Jesse to cook the meth using Walt's formula and get rid of Walt. That's the entire point of this whole affair. Also, throughout all this, you find out that the cartel is actually at war with Gus. The reason is because of what he did in Season 3 by getting the cartel to kill a DEA agent, and thus having, you know, the DEA or whatever law enforcement respond by killing a bunch of cartel guys in Juarez or whatever. The cartel responds by sending people after Gus to kill his men. And they want a war. And Gus, his organization's much smaller. He doesn't have as many men. He doesn't have as many soldiers. The cartel is an enormous organization. So he needs to find a truce. He needs to find a way to deal with the cartel and Walt at the same time. And this is really where the show like climaxes. These last like 5 episodes, I'm going to talk about all 5 because I think all of this is absolutely brilliant. This is like how to put a plot together right here. All right? The 5th episode, the 5th to last episode, what happens? Walt and Jesse's altercation, it comes to its finale. Like, Walt confronts Jesse about not killing Gus. Jesse didn't do this, of course, because Gus, gave him positive reinforcement, like I explained. Jesse finds out Walt put a tracking device on his car. He's all upset. They get into a fight. They argue. They fight. They physically fight at this point, and because this is another incident where Walt, he needs Jesse's help here, but he's treating Jesse like an idiot. And he does this before. He's done it in Season 2 and Season 3 when he's gotten mad at Jesse. But eventually, over time, he's always come back and, like, been on Jesse's side. But here, this is another incident where Walt has simply just reacted to Jesse's actions with aversion. And Jesse hates that, and so he kicks Walt out. He's like, I never want to see you again. This is Gus having driven a wedge thoroughly between them. He goes to Walt then, and he says, stay away from Jesse, because he can cook, you don't cook, you do on your own, we don't need you anymore. Right? He also needs to... the other problem Gus has at this point is he needs to take care of Hank, who's getting closer to his operation. And he's doing all this investigating. Even with Walt trying to keep Hank off of Gus's back, because obviously if Hank finds out, then it's all over for everyone. Right, what happens next? In the 4th last episode, what happens is Gus, Mike, and Jesse travel to Mexico, and they meet with Don Eladio, who is the kingpin, the head of the cartel. And Jesse shows that he can make the blue meth. He can make like the 92% or like the 99.2% purity meth that none of the cartel chemists can make. And Don Eladio was like, all right, you belong to the cartel now, because he can do that. And this guy, he's just trying to keep Gus in line, and Gus was responsible for killing some of his employees, the guys that died in Season 3 that I mentioned. Now here's the thing, Gus hates Don Eladio, and he also hates Tuco's uncle. What happened? You find out this whole backstory between them. When Gus wanted to start the business, he went to the cartel, he went to Don Eladio, and Tuco's uncle was there at the time, and he was much younger. And he came with a proposition. And he was with another guy, his friend or business associate, who might have been his lover. There's like fan theories about that. And then Tuco's uncle, whose name is Hector, kills the guy. He kills Gus's associate, lover, person, and at Don Eladio's orders, and Don Eladio's like, he's telling Gus to submit, and they don't kill Gus. They let him go. You don't know why. You don't really know much of the backstory here, but you find out that basically what happens is they force Gus into submission. Then Gus spends years building his own distribution network, and now you know that he hates these guys. So what he does is he gets like some bottle of rum or something, and when they go to the cartel house to party or whatever, now that they have this new cook, Jesse, Gus has them drink the expensive bottle of rum, and he drinks from it as well, but then he goes to the bathroom and throws it all up into the toilet, while the rest of them get poisoned and die. And it's this whole really, really badass like sequence. It's a little ridiculous if you think about it, but it was still interesting. The next episode the third last episode of the season, the crawl space episode, the infamous crawl space episode, Walt is scared. He wants to get his family out of the country. He needs money to do this. But Ted Beneke. I forgot to talk about this, but you know the whole Ted Beneke thing with Walt's wife, and they were having an affair, and he was stealing money from his company, and he got in trouble with the IRS, and he owed them a lot of money, and he could have gotten into legal trouble, and Skylar was actually laundering money for him, so she would have gotten in trouble. So she helped him by giving him Walter's earnings and saying, okay, use this to pay the IRS. Ted Beneke doesn't do this, so she talks to Saul. Oh, like Skylar, also in this whole season, she gets more involved in Walt's business. She meets Saul, they start talking, they start like buying the car wash and investing and shit, and she pretty much needs to get Ted to pay the money to the IRS because it's becoming a huge problem. But anyway, she uses that money, so Walt doesn't have any money, so he basically dies. There's this fantastic scene where he's in the crawl space below the house and he's looking for the money, and then Skylar comes in and he screams at her, "Where is the money? Where's the money?" And he's screaming and she's like, "I gave it to Beneke," and he just like cries and laughs because he thinks he's dead. He thinks it's all over. Meanwhile, what's his name? Gus threatened to... Gus and Jesse, they kill the cartel guys, then they come back, and Gus tells Walt that he's gonna kill his brother-in-law because he's getting too close. So Walt goes to the police and says that he goes to Saul and says that the cartel have an anonymous tip. There's an anonymous tip that the cartel is after Hank again, and so Walt's family, they go into hiding with Hank, and the DEA is all protecting them and shit, and Walt is left alone in the house and he has to figure out how to deal with Gus. And anyway, the crawl space scene is very significant because people say that is when Walter White truly dies, that the man that was there before Heisenberg is dead and now it's only Heisenberg that's left, which I think is pretty interesting. The second to last episode is when things really get like kicking into gear. This is a dramatic episode because this is where Walt convinces, solely through manipulation, he convinces Jesse to come back to his side. Whereas before, Gus had driven a wedge between the two. Walt gets rid of the wedge. He out-manipulates Gus. That's how good he is. He out-manipulates Gus and gets Jesse on his side. And there's a fantastic scene leading to it, and there's the whole... I'll talk later about like how it happened. And then the very last episode, Saul finds out that Gus hates Hector Salamanca, Tuco's uncle. And Walt knows who Tuco's uncle is because, well, I mean, he was there. He saw the guy back in season 2. So he realizes, he comes to Hector, and he's like, "Look, I know you hate me, but you hate Gus even more. Let's team up and kill him." And they do. And that's the end of this season. And it's beautiful, the way it's done. Every single second, it makes so much sense. Everything that happened, like, it makes sense that Hector would agree to do it. It makes sense that Gus would go to see Hector after the plan that they hatched. The plan that they hatched was Hector would go to the DEA, making it seem like he was talking to the DEA and ratting someone out, when in fact he wasn't, because he's not going to do that, because there's like honor codes in the cartel and shit. And Gus goes to Hector thinking, what kind of man talks to the DEA? And that makes sense as well, because it makes sense this is the one place Gus would not be cautious, because he knows, because he has a lot of history with Hector. Hector is the one thing that Gus is sensitive about. It's the one thing where he may not be thinking entirely clearly because of how much he hates that guy, how much he despises him. And he's going to go there and he's going to kill them. And of course, Walt set up a trap with a bomb, and then Hector smashes that little button on his chair, and they explode. And it's beautiful. And it shows, once again, it shows like even these super careful, super meticulous, like planning, manipulative characters like Gus and Walt, even they make mistakes, because there are things that are dear to them, that are emotional in their mind, that they don't think clearly when these things come up, like Hector Salamanca for Gus, and as we'll see for Walt, like his legacy, so to speak. And that's the end of season 4. And it's at the very end of this season that you find out something very important. What Walt did to get Jesse back on his side was diabolical in its complexity alone. He poisoned a kid. So Jesse started dating this woman, and she had a kid named Brock. And Jesse likes kids, and they got along. Walt poisons the kid. How, we don't know. He slipped something into his food, whatever. How, we don't know. He did, but he did it somehow. He poisons him with some plant, lily of the valley, that's growing in his backyard. We find this out at the very end of the season. What ends up happening is he has Saul lift the poisoned cigarette out of Jesse's pocket. The poison cigarette, the poison, the cigarette with the ricin in it, the poison that Jesse was supposed to use to kill Gus, that Walt prepared for him. He lifts this out of Jesse's pocket so that Jesse thinks, oh, the ricin somehow got, the kid somehow got in the ricin. And why does he do that? He does that so that Jesse suspects it, that it was Walt, that poisoned Brock, when in reality, he did poison Brock, but not with the ricin, because what Walt was planning was that when Jesse comes to confront him, he's going to have this whole epic conversation with Jesse and talk and manipulate Jesse and convince him that no, it was Gus who must have used the ricin to poison Brock. And he convinces Jesse of this, and Jesse finds out at the end, oh wait, it wasn't the ricin. But still, Gus had to go, right? Yeah, of course he had to go. He wanted to kill Walt. He had to go from Walt's point of view. So there's 3 layers to the manipulation. There's the first thing Jesse thought. The first thing Walt made him believe. Because like in general, there's 2 layers to a manipulation. There's what the other guy believes and what's actually true. In this, there's 3 layers. What's actually true is that Walt poisoned Brock with Lily of the Valley. What he makes Jesse believe at first was that he did it with ricin, and what he makes him believe at second was that it was Gus who did it with ricin. So there's a 3rd layer in there, and that's really cool. It's really cool that they think of stuff like that. Like, it's just fascinating to watch manipulation at work, because it's not... because it feels so realistic and believable. It feels so authentic. You can really appreciate it. Season 4 was fantastic. And the reason its ending was so climactic and grandiose was because they didn't think that they would get a 5th season. But then they did, and so they had to continue it. And this is where things get weird, because the pacing in Season 5, I would say, is completely different from the other seasons. It does not start off slowly. It doesn't end the cliffhanger. I mean, Season 4 sort of resolved everything. There's no cliffhanger at the end of Season 4. Season 5 picks off immediately where it left off, and the suspense and the pacing dies down a bit from where it was in Season 4, because at the end of Season 4 it was enormous. There was suspense shooting out of every orifice. Like, at the start of Season 5, it's a lot more toned down, but it's still at it's still way more dynamic and active than it was in the other seasons, than in Season 2 or 1 or 3. You know, the middle of those seasons, nothing was happening, and people were... there was just character development. The characters have been developed at this point. There's no character development anymore. Things just keep happening, and they happen and happen and happen, and everything that happens throughout season 5 is leading up to the plot ending at the very end of season at the end of season 5, which is the finale of the show, which is Walter White's death. If you didn't see it coming already, but yeah, it's his death. Now, I'm going to talk about flaws later, but I just want to get this through. Season 5 is by far the most watchable of them all because every single episode is just interesting. And so many of the little things left behind in the other seasons come up immediately. Skylar ends her relationship with Ted. She stops interacting with him. He is scared of her at this point because he got injured when Saul's thugs came over to convince him to pay the IRS. He's like beaten and his like neck was broken. They didn't do that. He fell down the stairs or something, but you get the point. And she realized he was scared of him, and he said, "Okay, I'll pay the IRS, Skylar. Don't hurt me." And she was like, "Good." She was scared of herself at that point. Skylar's whole arc is very interesting here. Right. Okay. Whatever. I'll talk about that later. The first episode of season 5, Mike comes back. Obviously, and we knew this would come. We knew that, okay, after Gus's death, Mike, he's still a variable, he's still important, he's going to come back. Hank, of course, he's figuring out, he has all of the assets that Gus left behind, so the police have that, so Mike, Jesse, and Walt, they team up, they use a giant magnet to destroy a laptop that had all of Gus's information on everybody. It's now in a police, evidence storage room. That was cool. Second episode, we learn about Madrigal Electromotive and the fact that there was at least 2 high-ranking individuals that knew what Gus was doing. One is probably, he was like the president or the VP of the food division of Madrigal, because Madrigal is an enormous company, and he knew what Gus was doing, and he and Gus played golf or something, so he knew the operation. He kills himself when the police find out about this, because when they discover Gus's lab, oh right, I didn't mention, well, Gus's lab is blown up at the end of season 4. Jesse and Walt, they blow it up. I don't know why they even do that doesn't make much sense. Out of revenge or something, it's bizarre. They didn't want people to take vengeance, somebody find it, I don't know, but they blow it up, and it's everybody knows about this whole operation now, Gus's operation, it crumbles, it absolutely falls apart, and this guy kills himself. Another person who works for the company is Lydia. She's a new character, she's this really crazy, paranoid chick. And what she would do is she was Gus's supplier. She supplied him with the ingredients to create the meth. And she works for Madrigal, and she gets involved, and she contacts Mike, and she tries to get Mike to kill she wants Mike to kill the guys who work for Gus who know about the operation. Mike, of course, doesn't want to do this because, like I said before, Mike has this really firm sense of loyalty. So he's like, no, nah, bitch, I ain't doing that. Unfortunately, he has to kill 2 guys anyway because one of them was paid off by Lydia to kill the others. So Mike has to kill them because he's a traitor. A traitor has to die. Bam. But Mike refuses to kill the others. However, the others do need to get paid because what happened was Gus was paying each of them money so that they would they had I forget the term for it, but they had hazard pay. That was it, hazard pay. If something happened to them, their families would be reimbursed. It was job security within the meth business. But Gus is dead, and all his assets are seized, which means this isn't going to happen, which means Mike has to provide this stuff so that those guys don't rat him out. Yeah. So Walt and Jesse start cooking meth again, and that becomes a whole issue. And Skylar obviously doesn't like all this, and because especially since now Walt is completely different. After having killed Gus, Walt is unhinged. He feels so in control that he doesn't even care anymore. He's not scared, he's just, I do what I want. So she gets terrified of that. She tries to like there's that scene where she's like drowning, where she just enters the pool and refuses to come out, and then she and Walt have this epic conversation where he confronts her about this, and he's like, what are you doing? What are you trying to take my kids? Oh, what are you doing? What are you trying to take my kids away? And she's like, and they're having this like contest of they're having this like argument. It's not even an argument. It's this ridiculous conversation about, oh yeah, well if you'll do that to me, I'll do that to you, and if you do this to me, I'll do that to you. And I liked that conversation because it made so much sense, because they could these two would obviously begin threatening each other, because eventually Skylar would grow tired of this shit. She doesn't want to live in a house where dealing drugs and killing people is shrugged off as shit happens. Beautiful line, beautiful. And Walt, of course, he threatens her back. He's like, okay, you want to take my kids away, I'll call you crazy, I'll say that you fucking, like, cut yourself or some shit. And she's like, I'll say that you beat me, and be like, oh, good, we'll have, you'll ruin our family then, the kids will be upset, you can't do that. It's like, he totally defeats her in the argument, too, because he realizes that there's nothing she can do to keep the kids away from him, and keep them from not knowing what it is that he actually is. And of course, like that, I really enjoyed that conversation. Right, then Mike enters the business, and then you have, then you have Mike, Jesse, and Walt doing business, and the way the three of these do business is hilarious. It makes so much sense, because they're all like, they all sort of part of like a pillar. Mike and Walt constantly argue, but Mike's the guy who knows the business, from the mechanical side. Jesse, he's there for doing the cooking. Walt knows the cooking, but Walt's the guy who really wants to be in control. It's just, it's interesting, the dynamic between the characters. Mike really becomes a character here as well. After season 4. What happens next? What happens then? We're introduced to some new characters. We're introduced to Todd. Todd is an interesting character. So, you have this whole subplot that they need more methylamine, but it's hard for Lydia, the supplier, to smuggle it in. What needs to happen is they need to rob a freight train, and then there's this whole heist episode of how it happens. And in the heist, when the heist is done, this kid on a bike sees the heist happening, and Todd, one of the people working with them on the heist, just shoots the kid with a gun without even thinking twice. Jesse's there, and we know what happens to Jesse if you kill a kid. He gets really, really fucking upset. And Todd is a maniac. Todd is fascinating because he is definitely psychotic. Like, you get the feeling, because this character, he has an antisocial, like, personality disorder, and this is palpable because he doesn't feel social with other people, because you can tell that he doesn't have empathy. Like, you can tell when he walks in and talks and interacts with people, he doesn't feel like any sense of empathy or emotion or care for other individuals, with the exception of Walter White to an extent. He had some respect for Walter, but for everybody else, he's just like, they're nothing to him, they're objects. And it's different because it's not like when if he's hurting someone, he doesn't react like someone who's being malicious, like someone who understands that they're hurting someone crazy and malicious. He doesn't understand that he's hurting. He's straight up like, yeah, I'm just like doing my own thing, cutting your leg off, killing you, whatever. I'm Todd, this is who I am. It's like, it's a special kind of crazy where you don't acknowledge your own evil, so to speak. So that was a very interesting ordeal. Then you have, so of course, eventually, the whole operation that Mike, Jesse, and Walt are doing gets found out, because the DEA are up into this shit. They're investigating Mike, they're investigating everyone. Because of course, after Gus's, like, Gus had a lot of security, but after that shit unraveled, I mean, it's hard to keep a meth operation going. Mike wants to sell it to a competitor. Walt, of course, doesn't want to do this because he doesn't want to sell the goddamn operation, so he convinces the buyout guy to work for him, that he's Heisenberg, he's awesome, you guys will work for me. Say my name. That was another beautiful line for another reason, because say my name had a double meaning, because he didn't want him to say Walter White, he wanted him to say Heisenberg, not because his name Heisenberg meant that he's awesome and that you should work for me, but because his identity is at this point Heisenberg and no longer Walter White. So that was a very good scene as well. And that the first half of the of season 5 basically climaxes where Walter kills Mike. Big spoiler there. He kills Mike because Mike is basically, he has to run away because the DEA figures out everything. And Walt, he needs the names of the guys that used to work for Gus, because they're now liabilities, they need to die. Mike doesn't want to give it to them. Walter, of course, he could get it from Lydia, but here's the thing. They get into an argument. Mike shows Walter what he actually is. He insults the guy. He calls him a wretch. Like he says, oh, your pride and your ego, and basically he makes it seem, he explains to Walt that everything that happened, everything bad that happened to them and their organization is because of Walt. He tore it all down because he was uncontrollably ambitious, he was crazy, he wanted more, he was greedy, and that it was all his fault. And this is the only individual, I'm pretty sure the only individual that Walt kills in the entire series, that he kills not because he's protecting himself, not because it's a business decision, not because this person is a threat and they need to die, not out of vengeance, he kills him out of pure fucking anger, out of pure, like, despise the guy. He just hates him. He just gets so mad and emotional. Why is that important? Because it comes back to the entire idea throughout the entire series, what Walt values the most. His image, his pride, his legacy. And that getting challenged is unacceptable. You can threaten his life, you can threaten his family, you can threaten Jesse, you can steal his money, anything. You cannot insult his image. Then he'll just kill you out of pure fucking hatred. So I really like that. The last episode of the half season basically has a montage where the 10 guys or whatever that worked for Gus all get killed because Walt uses Todd's connections with the Aryan Brotherhood to prison gang to kill all of these guys that are in prison so that they don't talk, so that his operation can continue in peace. And then there's this whole montage where he's working with Lydia and he's working with Todd because Jesse's out of the business now. Jesse doesn't want to work with Walt. Walt drives Jesse away. He tries to manipulate Jesse to come back too. He has all these, like, there's this whole conversation between the two of them where he's like, you know, he says, okay, well, you'll never get your money back. No, first he says, like, why would you want to... It's fantastic to watch because when Jesse wanted to leave the business, the amount of things Walt had to do to try and convince him to stay was profound. Like, he tried to appeal to Jesse's ambition. Didn't work. He tried to appeal to Jesse's sense of, you know, want for money. Didn't work. He wanted to appeal to Jesse's, what is it, sort of desire for more, this whole empire complex that Walter has. It didn't work. He tried to appeal, so that didn't work. Positive reinforcement didn't work. He tried to insult Jesse. He tried to say, okay, well, what are you going to do if you don't do this meth business? What are you going to do? Go karts? Go do drugs again? Be a drug addict? What are you going to do? You know, he tried to insult him. He tried to say that Jesse's life was worthless if he didn't do this, that Jesse had nothing else to do. He basically treated Jesse like a piece of shit. Okay? He was just like, the whole time, it didn't matter to him. He needed Jesse with him because he's the only person that he trusts to work with him, that he trusts to know the formula for his product. So when Jesse wanted to leave, it was like a betrayal for him. He needed to convince him, and he tried everything, but it didn't work because Jesse doesn't want the business because he's scared at this point. He sees that Walter is self-destructive and dangerous, specifically. He wants out. And anyway, and there's a fantastic scene at the end of at the end of episode 8 in the season where Walt goes to Jesse to make amends, and this is like months after. This is like a few months after killing Mike or killing the prison guys. Walter goes to Jesse to make amends, and Jesse has like a gun on the other side of the door. He doesn't even let Walt in the house, but he has like a gun ready in case Walt is there to kill him because he knows too much about the business. Like, Jesse is scared of Walt at that point because of what he did, because of what he knows Walt can do, and clearly Walt doesn't care about him or the kid that died when the train heist happened. You know, that happened. Walt said he cared about the kid and that he was sad, but then he just like whistled along and kept on making meth. Like, you get the whole idea. Walt has actually become evil at this point. And the whole montage at the end where he's like making money, eventually he stops making meth because Skylar convinces him, like, we have so much money here, we could never even launder all this. So he stops, and that's the end of this season. And then we reach the end of this half season, and what ends up happening is Hank goes into Walt's bathroom, finds a book with the writing dedicated to WW in the same handwriting that he read Gale's journal in another book, signifying that this was a book dedicated to Walter White by Gale. And then Hank makes the connection, Gale and Walter White, and that's what ends the series. This is the unraveling point. This is the point, this is the flux point where all of the plot threads tie up into a point, a single minute point right here, and then they all unravel again and just fall apart into just nothingness, into wherever they were. Hank finds out that Walt is Heisenberg. Finally, at the end of the series, this is what ends up happening. And I love it because it makes so much goddamn sense. It's something that was foreshadowed well in advance for this kind of thing to happen. And I know for a fact that this was thought out, that they wanted this to happen. Whenever the very fact that Hank was a DEA agent made it make more sense, that Hank be the one to find out who Walter is and to be the one to bring him down, because it means more to Hank, given how close they were. It's beautiful. And it makes even more sense given who Hank is as a character, given that he's not like some plebe. You know, he's actually a competent investigator. He notices the little things, just like Walt does. He's a good adversary. He's not the best manipulator. He's not a Gus Fring. But he's Walt's greatest adversary because he can't be touched, and he can't be touched, and he knows Walt well enough to do what Walt does back to him. He can't be out-manipulated, so to speak. He can't be outmaneuvered. You know, it's very hard to outmaneuver someone like Hank, because you can't touch him, and he's not... You as Walt, you can't touch him because he's your family, obviously. You can't kill the guy. He's part of the DEA as well. And he would just be ready for it because he's not a fucking fool. Anyway, I thought the whole adversarial thing there made a lot of sense. So in season 5, part B, Hank finds out, like, the first episode, he finds out everything. He makes all the connections. He finds out who Walter is. He finds out that he was Heisenberg all along. Everything, every death, every single cartel thing, all of that shit. He puts all the connections together. What ends up happening that season, Jesse, he's gone off the deep end. You know, he's no longer friends with Walt. He's just like throwing money away, the money that Walt gave him. He's just all upset about shit at this point over the kid that died. He's just like emo. It doesn't even make much sense what's happening to Jesse given that the amount of time that's passed, but he's just like, I feel like he's so sensitive. He's upset by the fact that someone like Walt, that Walt is still doing what he's doing, because he has a connection with Walt. He likes Walt. Walt is like his father figure, and he's doing all these things. I figure he just didn't like it. So Walt, of course, Walt has to hide his money out in the desert, and he does this in the first place that he and Jesse cooked, because it had like an emotional significance to him. How do I think it? So what happens next? So we're introduced more to Todd's character, and I already talked about that. We learn more about the Aryan Brotherhood. The guys that Walt used to kill the prison people, they're led by a guy called Jack, a skinhead, crazy ass, ruthless motherfucker. And Jack is interesting. I feel like Jack would have been another decent villain had he been around in the series long enough. But it also wasn't necessary. He was formidable enough to be the final like end piece villain for Walter, because that's who he ended up being. Basically what Jack and Todd is his nephew. They get together with Lydia and they killed the guy who was buying the methylamine, the guy who was buying out Walt's operation, because they want to make meth. And they want to get Walt back into it, and they need Walt to teach Todd how to do it. And Walt... no, sorry. Yeah, they need that's basically their whole line. They want to make meth now. They want to get into that business. Walt, meanwhile, he's dealing with Hank and his family issues, and he's a lot closer with his wife at this point, because they feel like they're both on the same side, given that they both could go to jail at this point. So what they do is Marie finds out, obviously. Hank finds out about everything. Marie finds out. Marie finds out that Skylar knew about this all along, even before Hank was shot, and she gets super mad at her sister. And they all get together in one episode called Confessions and have this, like, negotiation, which was wonderful. There's a guy on the internet who made, like, analyses of every single Breaking Bad episode that were pretty they were pretty detailed, and he really liked this episode. It was like his favorite episode. I could say it's a little too far-fetched. He reads a bit too much into it, but it was also interesting because he talked about this episode, and he was saying how with this episode every single character had a confession. Why was Hank so mad at Walt? Because Walt unmanned him, because Walt emasculated him, proving to him that the guy he'd been looking for the whole time was right in front of his nose, his goddamn brother-in-law. Marie had a confession because she, like, considered suicide or something, or she said she told Walt to kill herself or something like that. Anyway, so yeah, Walt and Hank, pretty much the whole family finds out what's going on except Walt Jr. They're having this whole conversation, and Walt and Skylar put, like, a tape together. They basically are not giving... They're not gonna... they can't... Hank isn't acting on behalf of the DEA yet, because he can't do that, because he doesn't have the authority, or... he can't go after his brother-in-law, like, as an open investigation, without announcing it to the world, and they want to spare Walt Jr., Walter's son. Walt and Skylar at this point, they're just trying to manipulate their way out of this. They don't want to go to jail, obviously. So what ends up happening... Oh, And Jesse, he's, a train wreck at this point. He just needs to get out. And Walt tries to convince him to leave the country or to just leave via the same method that he would have left back in the crawl space episode in season 4, through the contact that Saul has that can get people to disappear. So he goes to Jesse and he tries to convince him of this, and Jesse is just so afraid of Walt at this point. He thinks everything is a manipulation, and he's not wrong for the most part. And then this magical moment happens where they both hug. And this happens in the episode Confessions, and it's such a cool moment because Walt hugs Jesse when Jesse confronts Walt about manipulating everything and being evil and selfish about every single thing that he does. And Walt hugs him because he thinks Jesse just needs a father. I mean, I think the idea here was that Walt genuinely cared about Jesse. That was the point of it. Walt genuinely cared about Jesse. He wanted him to leave, yes, because it was better for him. He wanted Jesse to leave for him. But he also cared about Jesse. He didn't want Jesse to get hurt. He didn't want Jesse upset. He didn't want any of that. He was like, just get out of here. This doesn't concern you. You'll be fine. And he hugs him to show that they still have a connection. Jesse, of course, thinks this is just another manipulation. Oh, and at this point, Jesse also... they also make the mistake of looting Jesse's pocket again. Jesse figures out that they looted... Saul loots Jesse's pocket, like Huel, like the... If you've seen the show at this point, you know what I'm talking about. They loot Jesse's pocket again. He finds out, hey, Saul looted my pocket, which is what he believed before. This is how he thought Walt got his hands on the ricin in the first place. And it happened again now. So basically, when Jesse confronted Walt in season 4, he thought, look, he confronted Walt saying, you could have had Saul lift the cigarette, the ricin cigarette out of my pocket. Walt, of course, denied this, said, oh, it was Gus who did it, or whatever. And here it happens again. Something gets lifted out of his pocket. So he immediately thinks of the ricin cigarette and thinks, oh yeah, it must have been Walt then. It must have been Saul who did it on Walt's orders. Walt did it to manipulate me, and Walt really is the one who poisoned Brock. Jesse puts all this together, and he goes with gasoline to try and burn down Walt's house. And it's ridiculous. It's like every single episode is so tense in this season. And then what happens? The other obvious thing that you expect. Hank finds Jesse, and finally those two start working together to take down Walt. And Jesse tells Hank everything, every single thing that happened, because he doesn't care anymore. Walt is no longer his friend. He tells him everything. And Hank puts it together, hey, Walt actually cares about Jesse. We should use that against him. We should have Jesse with a wire, talk to Walt, and that's how we'll bring him in. Jesse doesn't want to do that. Jesse wants to find where Walt's money is and find out where he, get him where he really lives, get his money. And what they do to that, the way they do that is also beautiful. The way Hank catches Walt is the way he outwits him, the way he... I love it because it makes sense. It makes so much sense. Okay, in general, I like it in fiction when a really intelligent, really powerful, a character that's really good at something gets bested by someone else who's not necessarily as good at that particular thing, but they're good enough that with a circumstantial or emotional factor behind it, they can beat the other character. What happened here was Hank outwitted Walt because he knew Walt was greedy. He knew that Walt valued his money. He knew that that money represented Walt's work, which was his everything, his life, his legacy, his identity, Heisenberg's identity. He knew that if he showed Walt that he found that money, Walt would just come running, Walt would come driving, afraid that Jesse was going to burn it down. And that's what happened, and that's how they found it. And Walt comes there and he's all surprised, oh my god, what's going on? And a minute later, Hank's car shows up and they find where Walt brought the where Walt hid his money. And it makes so much sense that if his money was threatened, if that was threatened, Walt would not think clearly. It's the same with how Gus was beaten. Gus was beaten because he wasn't thinking clearly, because this was Hector Salamanca. This was the guy he made it his life to spite. This was Walt's life. This was his life, literally. Everything he did in his life, the most significant thing he did was this money that he had attained in the last few months. That's why he felt so threatened. And then we have the magical episode Ozymandias. This is by far the best episode in the entire show, I think. Ozymandias, I think, is the best episode. Even better than the episodes in Season 4. Those episodes fit together better, but Ozymandias is spectacular because what happens? Jack comes in because Walt was needed Jack's help to take out Jesse. He didn't want to kill Jesse, but Jesse was becoming a problem. Jesse was becoming a problem dog. And Skylar suggested, why don't you just kill this guy? Why do you care? And Walt's like, I can't kill him, he's a human being. What are you talking about? Which is weird, because Walt kills human beings like they're fucking taking out the trash. But no, he cares about Jesse. He doesn't want to kill him. But what choice does he have? Right? What choice does he have if Jesse's going to be like this? If Jesse is going to go after his money? And then Jesse goes after his money, threatening to burn it, and Walt thinks, how could you, Jesse? You know, this is what we worked for, and he tries to and he's pleading and crying and saying, come on, and trying to convince Jesse that it's all good, and that he shouldn't burn it down, and that everything he did was to protect Jesse. Like, a lot of the time, like, Walter did not always make good decisions throughout the show. He always made decisions that were either benefited him or protected Jesse. He always made one of the two. And that's the point. That Jesse was always in his mind, and it was ungratitude. It was the ungratefulness that Jesse had that got him at the end, because Jesse didn't see this, and Walt hated that, and he was like, okay, I'm going to kill you. So he gets Jack to kill him. But of course Jack shows up, and Hank is there, and he can't kill Hank, but Jack does it anyway because these are DEA agents. He has to kill them. So what happens? Walter's world crumbles. If Jesse's gone, first of all. The Jack's guys, they take him away. Walt's like... Actually, okay. His world crumbles, okay? His family, they're done with him. He killed Hank. He can't, you know, he's done. He's done. They're gonna call the police. It's over. The whole lid comes off. The entire world knows who Walter White is, who Heisenberg is. And as for Jesse, well, Walter hates him now because he's an ungrateful piece of shit. He fucking spat on him. Like, he got them to steal his money. He doesn't even blame Jack for taking that money. He blames Jesse for doing that shit. He's the one who colluded with the fucking feds. He colluded with Hank to find the money, and he manipulated Walt to get it. And after all, he was ungrateful for all of what Walt did for him, protecting him from Gus, etc. And it's spectacular, because right at the end, the very last thing he says to Jesse, I watched Jane die, and at no point before did he say anything about Jane. Nothing at all. And he's like, I watched Jane die. That was a good moment. That was a powerful moment, because you could just tell this was the climax of what their relationship had gotten to. I watched Jane die. So you did. And that was the end of that. And then the rest of the episode is just Walter's world falls apart. His family wants nothing to do with him. They get in a fight. Like what I said, the lid gets blown over and he has to leave the country, because now the police are going to be after him. And that's the next episode, the Granite State. He's hanging out in New Hampshire for like a year. Anyway, what do I want to say? But yeah, the point is, why is the episode called Ozymandias? Well, if you don't know, Ozymandias is a poem. I forget the name of the author, but it's a poem about a traveler who's walking through the desert, and he finds some old statue or the remains of a sphinx or something, and I think it's a statue of a king, and it's the remains of the empire of Ozymandias, who was this great emperor, and now his kingdom has fallen apart and it's all in dust. The whole theme of the poem is about how empires eventually crumble, and that's what this show is about, the crumbling of Walter White's empire. That's what happened. It's touching. There's actually a YouTube video where Walter White, the actor who plays Walter White, reads the poem. It's not in the show. It's on YouTube, with shots of the desert being shown. It's pretty cool. It makes so much sense that they would title this Ozymandias, because that's exactly what was happening. The last 2 episodes of the entire show that follow, they're a lot slower because they're basically just wrapping things up, because we've already seen what happens. The point has already been made at this part of the show. The point has been made. This is what happened. The empire has crumbled. Walter White, he has not died yet. Heisenberg has not died yet, but the empire has crumbled. That was the point. Anyway, in the Granite State episode, at the very end, Walter decides he sees an interview with Elliot and Gretchen. Again, Elliot and Gretchen, characters that have been like under the radar for 3 seasons, come up again, and they say, oh yeah, Walter White had nothing to do with gray matter. He just like named the company, and he gets so mad when he watches that interview. And the reason they talk about that is because everybody knows that Walter White is Heisenberg now, and they're like doing an interview about it, because it's like a public image thing for their company. And he's obviously pissed off. He can't, his money, like most of his money got stolen by Jack. What's left, he can't even get that money to his son because he called his son and his son hates him. His son doesn't want anything to do with him. He wants him to like die. Skylar doesn't want anything to do with him. That's it. Marie's husband is dead. She's like, she's fucking crazy now. So what does he do is, he's like, that's it. He has 1 shot left to make everything right, to pay back all the people that have wronged him and have caused him to his life to fall apart. Although the reality is he caused his life to fall apart. It was nobody else. He just needed to clear the air and make things right. So the first thing he does in the very last episode was he gets the money to Elliot and Gretchen. He says, you give this to my kids on their birthday or on their 18th birthday to pay for college or whatever. It's their money, and he threatens them with like laser fucking Badger and whoever with laser pointers. That was a cool scene. That was cathartic because he had like these two basically he treated Elliot and Gretchen like they were nothing, and he had complete control of the situation, and I like that because I really felt sorry for him and what happened between those 3. You can't really blame Elliot and Gretchen, but like it was fascinating to watch. What does he do after that? After that, he goes to his wife. He can't see his son, right? But he goes to his wife. He goes to Skylar, and they have a final confrontation. They have a final talk. She doesn't call the police, but although she's being watched by the FBI, because this is like a year after the events of Ozymandias and everything beforehand. Like Granite State and Felina, the last 2 episodes, are honestly an epilogue. Like the finale of the show should just be Ozymandias and then 2 epilogue episodes. I mean, that's what I feel anyway. What happens is she's being watched by the FBI, so he has to sneak in there, and he tells her they're having a conversation about everything he did, and she's like, Walt, if you say one more time you did it for this family, I swear to God, I don't know what I'm going to do. I forget the line, but in response, he says, no, I did it for me. And I like that, because that's the point. That is the point accentuated, underlined with a square right at the end, beautifully. I did it for me. It felt good. it made me feel good, or I felt like I was alive. Something he says, but it's something along the lines. He did it for himself, not for his family. That was an excuse. He did it for himself. And that was the end of how he interacted with his family. And then, the very last thing he does, the very last thing, is his relationship with Jesse. That's the last thing, because that's the thing that's kept us going this entire time. The last piece of the puzzle, the last thing that completes Walter White. He poisons Lydia because fuck her, right? She's a piece of shit, and she's gonna try to kill him, and she does try to kill him. And then he jury rigs an M60 and to kill all of the Aryan Brotherhood guys, including Jack, who betrayed him. And he doesn't even care. Jack's just a scumbag, and he just kills him. He doesn't even care about the money at this point. Like, he shoots them all down with that M60, and then Jack's like, wait, if you kill me, you won't get that money. Walter doesn't care, just kills him before he even finishes a sentence. And he frees Jesse. He saves Jesse's life. That's the most important thing here. He saves Jesse's life. Because he sees what they did to him. He sees, in spite of Jesse, despite the fact that Jesse was ungrateful, despite the fact that Jesse hates his guts and doesn't understand why he did all the things he did, he doesn't care anymore. I mean, as far as he's concerned, he did it all for himself. This is his repentance. He saves Jesse's life because he actually, despite the fact that he is an evil piece of shit son of a bitch, he really does care about Jesse. And so he saves his life. And then Jesse kills Todd, who's an asshole. And I saw that coming. I predicted that long before it was coming. Long before the finale. I'm like, you know what? Todd is going to die at the end, and Jesse's going to be the one to kill him. And he does. And I felt good, because it was like, yeah, fucking Jesse deserves it. Jesse deserves to kill Todd, the guy who's killed like 4 children. Like, Jesus Christ. And then they exchange their final line. Walt's like, do it, you know you want to. And Jesse's like, tell me you want to. No, or say it, or say that you want to. Say it, because it's you who wants me to kill you. It's you who wants to die, Walt. It's not me. And that's the whole point of the show. That's the whole point. It's the selfishness of single thing that Walter did. Every single thing he did, everything, was selfish. That is the point. And then Jesse drives off and Walt dies. And that's the end of the series. And it was incredibly good, I would have to say. Yeah. I mean, at the end of it, Jesse's really the good guy. Jesse's the one who has empathy. Walter, I mean, he's morally questionable at best. The other characters, I've talked about them. There's nothing else left to talk about, really. What could have been done better? Let's talk about that, because that's a pretty... There's actually quite a few things that could have been done better. I thought the pacing had issues at times. There were certain episodes that were so painfully slow that they didn't even need to be that slow. They could have been like cut in half. Some episodes in season 1, the whole ending to season 1 being poorly narratively set up, I've already mentioned. There's a few bottle episodes. Like, season 3 had this stupid, ridiculous episode where Jesse and Walt spend the entire episode like trying to find a fly that's stuck in the lab. It has nothing to do with anything. It's just the two of them talking and looking for this fly. And there's plenty of character development that happens. And they talk about that whole like airplane crash event that happened with Walt, and how airplane crash that happened in season 2, and Walt mentions how he figured out that, oh, this guy was Jane's father and I met him in a bar. And that's interesting. I don't even know, like, at that time I wasn't even thinking, like, why did this whole airplane crash thing even happen? Or not that, but Walt meeting Jane's father. What was the significance of that? What were the writers trying to tell us? Is it the whole like chaotic probability, randomness, chance thing that they were talking about? because that doesn't really go with the other themes of the show. I mean, I don't know. It could have been that. Sorry. It could have been that. It could have been they just wanted some dialogue. Yeah, I guess that's what they wanted. They wanted some dialogue, but it also just like I'm trying to think of an explanation because I can't really think of one off the top of my head. The plane crash itself made sense. Why Walt met Jane's father? Why did that happen? Why did that dramatic irony happen? What were they trying to get with that? And like the astronomical unlikelihood of that happening. What does that astronomical unlikelihood represent? Does that represent anything that's happened to Walt and Jesse? I mean, I guess it could. Maybe that's what it represents. Maybe it represents the unlikelihood of their relationship or something, or where their lives are going, or life in general. Who knows? The show doesn't really have too many, like, huge analytical themes. I know that sounds weird given how analytical I'm trying to make this, but I don't think it has too many themes, honestly. The themes it has are pretty self-evident. Right. What else do we have? Okay, we also have Marie. I really like her character, and not because her character was annoying or anything, but because she was just used wrong. There were scenes in season 1 and 4 where they tried to do this whole shoplifting thing with Marie, this like kleptomaniac shoplifting thing, and it didn't matter because it went nowhere. It had nothing to do with what was happening with the other characters. Like, inarguably, it had nothing to do with that. She just shoplifted, and at the end of the episodes, like, it was a big thing, but then it didn't matter at all. Why was it there? I mean, it was there because they needed something to be there, right? The writers wanted to put something there, but Marie is a tertiary character. Like, she's a character she's well developed, sure, she has a personality, I'm not denying that. But she doesn't add anything to the theme. She's just there to service the plot. She's just there to service the plot and add flavor. She's there to give context to Hank's reality. She's there to give context to Skylar's reality, Walt's reality, but not much else. She has no thematic role in the show whatsoever. So I think that was done poorly. Another thing I didn't like is the pacing in season 5. I feel like the pacing structure of the other seasons could have been conserved in 5 if it had been split up into 2 seasons. And season 5 could have had, like, there could have been a whole other subplot to it to make it longer, but basically the idea is the 8th episode of season 5 was a montage of Walter White's success as he's now a kingpin. What could have happened was they just, instead of montaging it, they could have actually just shown his success. They could have just shown what it is that he does, that he's now the kingpin and there's nobody opposing him. Gus is dead, Mike's dead, the prison guys are dead, everyone's gone. Like, why not just show us what he does at that point? Because that's him at his pinnacle. That is him at his most evil. We didn't really see that. It was all montaged. Like, I didn't like that. I would have wanted to see it some more. Because then we're met with Walt in season, in the second half of season 5, and he's kind of different than what he was in the first half. Because in the second half, he's been on a roll for a few months now. He's been making money, selling it to people in, like, selling meth to people in the Czech Republic, making tons of money. He has a huge pile of cash that's the size of fucking a bed. And he even leaves the business. Like, he's way more sympathetic in the second half of season 5. Even his wife doesn't hate him as much as she did in the first half of season 5. So, like, what happened there? There's a gap. I don't want there to be a gap there. There shouldn't be a gap there. The only gap in the show that actually makes sense to me is the gap at the very end between Ozymandias and Granite State. Like, the 1 year gap that happens for the Granite State Felina epilogue, that gap makes a lot of sense. Now, okay, right, so that's how season like the first half of season 5 could have been extended to an entire season, and the second half could have been extended because they didn't really show Hank's investigation of Walt. I mean, it seemed like Hank figured everything out very quickly, which I'm sure he would quickly figure it out, but I don't think it would be like within a day. I think he would have to think about it, sit on it, do some research, not immediately, like within a week, know, like within 2 days, know everything. No, I wanted to see him walking around, like putting pieces together, solving the puzzle, and not just instantly knowing everything and having him confront Walt about it within an episode. Because that's what happened. I thought it would have been extended. I thought Hank would have been investigating. Granted, the 8 episodes, the last 8 episodes were used pretty well. Each one covered significant plot points that you can't fault any particular episode for doing too much, except for the first one. The first one did too much. That's the one that should have been extended, and it could have made it a whole season. The other flaws, I mean, you could argue that there's flaws with the finale as well. The fact that the finale is not as epic as Ozymandias, that's alright with me. I feel like it makes a lot of sense because Ozymandias is when the Empire, Walt's life, falls apart. The last episode is where he literally dies. His life is already fallen apart. His empire, it's gone. But he himself dies 2 episodes later. That's fine. That makes a lot of sense to me, actually. That it would be presented in that way, because it feels more authentic. Like, he doesn't necessarily need to die when his empire crumbles as well. What I didn't like, though, was the very last episode seemed fairly contrived, like, compared to other episodes. The way he dispatched Jack and saved Jesse and all the shit there, like, it was actually ridiculous. The fact that he could even rig an M60 into a car and jury-rig it seemed ridiculous, because he's not a mechanical engineer. I don't know how he knew how to do that. Second of all, it was shooting everybody who was like 4 feet off the ground, and he and Jesse were lying flat on the floor, and yet it hit him in the leg, and he bled out from that like a few minutes later. Like, how did that happen? How did he get shot, first of all, and then how did he walk around for like 20 minutes and then randomly fall over like dead? Like, that's when he bled out. Like, it hit him in the leg, it didn't hit him in the fucking body. I mean, they wanted him to die, but I think it would have been better if he just, like, shot himself or something at the end. Instead of having it happen like that. I mean, I guess they did it like that because having the scene where he legitimately shoots himself is a little too... It's, like, a little too dark, or it's, like, trying too hard almost. Whereas having him just bleed out it's more... The bleed out ending is more in tone with the episode, the last 2 episodes overall, which are kind of bleed out episodes. Like, Walt didn't die with a bang, he just bled out slowly. That's what those 2 last episodes mean. So yeah, there's that. All in all, though, those are the few flaws. I've actually heard a lot of people didn't like the ending to the entire series because of that. So I think a few things... I mean, I guess if the ending could have been reworked a little, maybe he got shot by one of the guys and bled out like that. That would have made a lot more sense. But all in all, it was good. I don't really have anything else to say. I've talked about the theme. I mentioned that in the non-spoiler section. It's all about the individual character, the creation of these... the kingpin villain and how that type of person comes about. It's about it's not about greed, but it's about pride and ego and self-fulfillment, especially, in what someone would do, what someone can do for that type of thing, what someone would do for that. Because self-fulfillment, you know, how important it is, how people change. It's also about change, how a person can change to do the thing that they want to do, to get out of mundanity. It's a character piece at the end of it all. It's a piece about a character and what a single character, a single person would do, could do, if put in a particular situation. If stimulated properly, what would they do? This is what they would do. So this review has been 3 hours long. I need to wrap it up at this point. It's really, really late. But I had fun, and hopefully you all enjoyed my opinion. I'm not sure if I talked more about what actually happened in the seasons, what I thought about them, but I generally liked each season more, like the consecutive seasons more. As we go from season 1 to 2 to 3, I liked the later seasons more than the earlier ones, because of the pacing, because of how the plot explodes. But at the end of the day, a lot of the quality of the show is derived simply from the pacing and how plot elements build together. I think that stuff is a lot more important than the thematic stuff in play, than the stuff with like character development and what it means and what the idea behind it all is. No, that stuff is cool, and some of that is there, but the important part is how it's written and how it all comes together. And honestly, I will say this is what the standard for shows should be. Shows should be like this. Because every show could be like this. The show did not cost that much to make. That's what I think. Show should be like this. This should be the standard. Anyway, that's basically it. And I'm going to sign out before my camera dies. Thank you for watching if you did. And I'll see you next time.